include some updates to my previous Symbols of Power presentation, and the only way to give you the full context of the updates that I want to include is to include some of the fuller context from the previous presentation. And so I'm going to have to make this a little bit longer than I would like it to be, but it's necessary to include the full context. Otherwise, for those of you who are just joining my channel, or you're not privy to any of my previous work or anything that I've shown in my other presentations, you won't fully grasp the information that I'm going to be sharing, and because you won't have the full context of what I'm trying to portray and what I'm displaying to you here. So I'm going to include some updates dispersed within the full context of my previous Symbols of Power presentation. And this is in reference to As Above, So Below the Belt. The snake in ancient mythology, symbology, and theology is associated or recognized with the female goddess. With the male aspect as well. The snake is a symbol of both the male penis, the male phallic energy, as well as the female energy. And this is the archetypal serpent goddess. This is why we always find the archetypal dragon queen, or the drag queen, which is exactly why the drag queens of Hollywood and its magical druidic order always show you the dragon queen, the mother of dragons. The serpent goddess represents the Kundalini energy. The Kundalini energy comes from the etymology of kunda, which comes from kunta, kunt, kunt. The etymology of kunt, meaning goddess, queen. The only word representing the entire female genitalia, and not just one specific aspect of it. So Kundalini comes from kunt, as well as lini, line, ling, lingam, which all refers to the phallic line, the phallic, the pillar, the lingam, the line. The linguini, the lingerie, which are the thin strings, the thin line, the straight line, the phallic line. The lingam, which is the linguistics, the tongue. How the tongue relates is directly linked to the lingam, which is the penis, which I will cover further on as we get deeper into the anatomy of As Above, So Below the Belt, relating to how what is above the belt is directly a representation and a reflection of what is below the belt, as far as glands and organs are concerned, and physiology. So kunt comes from female genitalia. Old Norse kunta, Old Frisian, Middle Dutch, and Middle Low German kunta, from Proto-Germanic kuntun, a link to Latin cuneus, meaning wedge, as in cuneiform, which was a language using specific wedge shapes to create the alphabet. As it's no mystery that the female vagina is known as the wedge. It's the female delta. It is the downward-facing pyramid, the female delta. Tradition said the triangle was the primordial image of the female triangle of life. It was known as the Kali Yantra, representing Kali as Kunti, or as the Yoni Yantra, or the sign of the vulva. In Egypt, the triangle was a hieroglyphic sign for a woman, and it carried the same meaning among the gypsies, who brought it from their original home in Hindustan. In the Greek sacred alphabet, the delta, or the triangle, stood for the holy door, the vulva of the all-mother Demeter. Most ancient symbol systems recognize the triangle as a sign of the goddess's virgin mother crone, Trinity, and at the same time as her genital holy place, the source of all life. The triangle represented the virgin moon goddess called Men Nefer, the archaic deity of the first mother city of Memphis, of Egypt. The triangle everywhere connected with the female trinity and a frequent component of monograms of the goddesses. To the Gnostics, the triangle signified creative intellect. The Sinai Peninsula, which is known as the Fertile Crescent, the female's fertile crescent. Cuneus, meaning wedge, from Proto-Indo-European root gu, meaning hollow place, as in hollow hole or vagina. From Proto-Indo-European gwen, which is the root of the word queen, related to Greek gyna, meaning woman, hence gynecology, the study of the woman, of female anatomy.
And you are Gina?
Gina! Hey, what's up?
Nothing.
Look, I'm gonna be real honest with you. It's been a long time since I've been with a man. Spent a lot of time with the ladies. Looking to get back up on that pogo stick, you know what I'm saying?
So the origins of the word cunt directly relate to the female goddess, or queenhood, the goddesshood, the goddess aspect. It is not something derogatory. Anytime you use the word cunt, it is held in the highest, most sacred aspect. So when we look up the etymology of the word Gina, or Gina, the name Gina, it brings us to yawn, the open wide mouth, the yawn, her gape. From Jin, Old Norse Gina, to yawn, Proto-Indo-European guy or gay, to yawn, gape, to gape, the yawn, to gape, be ajar. So this is why we're talking about her yawnin, her yoni, the yoni, the yawn, the open mouth, the gape, her gina. The original root word for God is the very same root word for gape, the gap, her gaping void of chaos. The same root word for yawn, her yoni, her yani. The same root word for chaos of ancient mythology, which is the goddess of the deep abyss, of the black abyss, the serpent goddess of the deep waters, the kraken, Tiamat. The gaping vagina, the yoniverse. Gu, meaning hollow place, her hollow holy hole.
Fall into the gap now, get to the gap.
We got 4 tons of Levi's waiting for you.
At the gap now, fall into the gap.
It's the world's greatest selection. It's true.
At the gap now, fall into the gap.
Whatever your shape, sex, or size,
We got your favorite Levi's jeans. At the gap now, shoot out the gap, fall into the gap.
The great abyss, the black abyss of space and the deep oceans. The matrix, which means womb. The mother, mater, being the woman where all of life comes from, the source of life. Greek metra means uterus or womb, and meter, mater, matter, meaning mother, where pater, father, is the energetic pattern that gives rise to so-called matter, and thus geo, the word-forming element meaning earth. The earth, coming from Greek Gaia, gives us geometry, geometry, earth measure, literally measure of the mother, but more accurately the proverbial mapping of the womb of our mother, which we inhabit. We are all individual organisms, cells who work together within the body of the earth, forming organizations that we call a body of peoples. Within this matrix womb that is our Mother Earth. Language reflects the roots and the path of our fractal pattern of nature in our universe. How that which we call God, most refer to as a man, just shows us that we are cells that make up a larger organism called Earth, which is itself just a living cell that makes up a larger organism called a galaxy, which is also a feminine word which comes from geo, galactose, meaning milk, which is why we have the Milky Way galaxy. Source or origin, from mater. Genitive matrice, meaning mother. Chaos, gaping void. Abyss, that which gapes wide open, is vast and empty. From Proto-Indo-European root gu, to gape or yawn. From Greek kaino, I yawn, meaning of utter confusion, is extended from theological use of chaos for the void at the beginning of creation. The Greek for disorder. The concept of primordial comes from Latin primordium, which is the root words of prime, of primus, and ordire, prime being the first, and ordire being to begin, as in the beginnings of creation. So it's the beginning of order. And order comes from a body of persons living under a religious discipline, from Old French order, position, estate, rule, regulation, religious order. A row, line, rank, arrangement, series, pattern, routine. From the roots of ord, or arrangement, to arrange. Nominative ordo, which is the source of ordire, to begin to weave. Comparison with primordial. And this will make further sense towards the very end of the presentation, when again I mention the order of the universe and the weaving of the universe at the primordial creation. Hesiod's Theogony, who described chaos as the primeval emptiness of the universe, begetter of Erebus and Nyx, the nighttime, and in Ovid's Metamorphosis, who opposes chaos to cosmos, the ordered universe, meaning orderless confusion. In other words, out of order. In other words, ordo ab chaos. Order out of chaos. Cosmos out of chaos. Because it's the original matriarchy. The matriarchy behind the patriarchy. Out of order, order comes out of chaos. And again, the very same root word for chaos is the same root word for God. Call or invoke. From the root gu, to pour a libation, source of Greek kain, to pour. Linked to geyser, meaning to squirt, to gush, to pour, also from Proto-Indo-European gu. The gape, the gush, the pour, the Milky Way galaxy, the dark rift in the sky, which appears as the geyser spewing the sacred milk from the mother Gaia into the Milky Way galaxy of the dark mother, of the dark womb. The dark rift. A rift is a rip. A rift is linked to rip, to tear. A split, act of splitting. A cleft, a rift, a rip, a breach. This is the act of splitting open the sacred goddess, splitting the goddess in two, splitting the waters into two. The Kraken is the giant sea monster which comes from the deep. In mythology, the Cetus, the giant sea monster, comes from the crack at the bottom of the ocean. These stories in these Hollywood movies, Homer's The Odyssey, all of the sea monsters, they come from the crack in the earth, the crack of the abyss. So, and Kraken literally comes from crack. Crack and Kraken are literally etymologically linked. From Dutch kraken, crack, and to crack is to make a sharp noise, as in cracking the whip. The kraken comes from root word of crake, which is a pole, a stake, or a post, or in other words, the phallic, which pierces the feminine, the phallic, which pierces the serpent monster.
penetrates the serpent monster, it penetrates the sea monster, the phallic and the feminine, the act of sex, of slaying the dragon, of slaying the serpent sea monster goddess. So the Kraken is literally the crack in the earth. The crack in the earth which the sea monsters escape. The Cthulhu, which comes from the crack deep within the earth. The giant squid, the squid monster, the octopussy.
Release the Kraken!
Like the traveling fools aboard the Odyssey, we have the seamen who are all alone in the vast sea of the Black Abyss. And if you pay attention to the movie The Odyssey, you'll know it's talking about sex magic, because the seamen enter the sacred cave of the goddess. And the deeper down the tunnel they go, they awaken the primeval monster of the female goddess. And that's why in the movie they show you the seamen battling the sea monster inside the deep caverns of the cave, or the labyrinth. And that's why they bear the light of the fire fertility and the phallic sword. Then they come to the end where they meet the mouth of the primeval goddess. The cave opening is the vagina, but this is the cervix of the woman, and that's why it's contracting and opening, and that's why it's swallowing up all the semen. So it's like a big bucket of water or the bottomless pit, and that's why it swallows all of them up, including the ship. And then they show you the primeval goddess having an orgasm and squirting up in the air, which is the female ejaculation, like when she squirts.
Oh, crap.
He began to swim to the primordial mound of the goddess. So now maybe you'll understand the next scene from the Pirates of the Caribbean.
So bad? Oh. Hello, beastie.
So then he pulls out his phallic sword and he dives in and pokes the serpent goddess. So the goddess vagina of the sea monster swallows the semen. And before I forget, why do you think that the Kraken is always portrayed as an octopus? Because like I said before, that's the mouth of the vagina, and that's why it's called an octopus, because the gap or the slice looks like the mouth of the vagina. And of course they shapeshift or camouflage. So the Kraken represents the primordial goddess of Tiamat. the primeval goddess who gave birth to the 11 guardian monsters. And remember that all the Dragon Slayer movies are about the slaying or the slicing in half of Tiamat, who was cut in half, sliced open or diced in two, like the slice of the moon goddess, or like when you slice open and split, which gives us the slice of the female slit, which is the sacred black cave or hole from which all life is born and all life is killed. And that's why they tell you that esoteric wisdom is belonging to an inner circle. So let's take a look at some splitting open and some gaps and holes.
It was from deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, a fissure between two tectonic plates, a portal between dimensions, the breach. I was 15 when the first kaiju made land in San Francisco.
The Semitic Old Testament creation stories come from the earlier Semitic, Sumerian, Assyrian, Akkadian, and Babylonian creation stories, of which Tiamat is the primordial goddess of the ocean, of the deep abyss, the primordial serpent goddess of the dark, deep abyss, mating with Absu. So Tiamat is the goddess of the salt water, of the sea, the ocean, mated with Absu, the god of fresh water. She's the symbol of the chaos of primordial creation. She represents the beauty of the feminine depicted as the glistening one. It is suggested that there are two parts to the Tiamat mythos, the first of which Tiamat is a creator goddess through a sacred marriage between salt and fresh water. These themes of the Old Testament of the creation stories, which come from the further Egyptian creation story of the primordial mound of the waters of the abyss, are about the two waters. Again, the waters of above and the waters below. It's all about the two waters, the salt water and the fresh water. She peacefully created the cosmos through successive generations. In the second Chaos Kampf, Tiamat is considered the monstrous embodiment of primordial chaos, the female principle of a watery creative force, with equally strong connections to the underworld. The story of dividing the two waters. This is a universal theme, dividing the two waters, the mixing of the waters, the intermingling of your sexual waters. Harriet Crawford finds this mixing of the waters to be a natural feature of the Persian Gulf, where waters from the fresh water from the Arabian aquifer mix and mingle with the salt waters of the sea. It's all about the difference in density between salt water and fresh water, and drives a perceptible separation between the two. And this is because salt water is much more dense than fresh water is. So therefore salt water sinks to the bottom and fresh water floats above that. Now it also depends on the temperature of the two waters. If the water is colder, then it depends which one will sink to the bottom. But either way, this is about the separation and the intermingling of the two waters. The waters of above from the waters that are below. And this is the engine that drives the currents of the entire ocean. This is all about science and the densities of the two waters of nature, the salt water and the fresh waters. And this is the separation of the waters from above, the heavens, the sky waters, the fresh water, the rain, from the waters that are below, the salt water, the oceans. So you have the Father Sky, who is Greek Oranos, who rained down his seed onto the fertile earth of Gaia, onto the mother, Gaia, to impregnate her, which gives the fertility of life and renews the crops, the regeneration, the regrowth, the life cycle. So this is referring to the two waters, the rain and the oceans, the water cycle, the Father Sky who rains his fertile seed upon and impregnates the fertile earth, who grows the fertile crops, the fertility of nature, the life cycle of nature. Two waters of nature, the salt water and the fresh waters, which intermingle and intermix, just like the sexual act where you mix, the male water mixes with the female water. The mixing of these waters, the sexual act, the splitting of the goddess into two, the dividing, splitting her open like a seashell. And as I've covered in all my previous videos, the seashell is the symbol of the goddess, the vagina, the split, the gape, the gap which divides in two, the split. So all of these mythological stories, the creation stories of the male who slays the serpent, the female serpent goddess, the dragon goddess, the male slaying the dragon, it's all about the sexual act. The male who slays the goddess all night long. He slays her. And this is exactly why Moses divides the two waters, splits the waters with his hard staff. He splits the sea so his Israelites can travel through the Red Sea to the promised land of flowing with milk and honey, which I will touch on later at the end of the presentation. Marduk slicing Tiamat in half, made from her ribs the vault of heaven and earth. Her weeping eyes became the source of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, the two rivers which form the Fertile Crescent, the female's fertile crescent, between the two waters which are divided. In Lord of the Rings, the two waters are located between the gap of Rohan, the rivers Isen and Adorn, which form the effect of the triangle between Isen and Adorn rivers. Now let's take this back to physiology. In the human body, we have two major fluid systems, blood and lymph, the two waters. Lymph means clear water. The lymph system is the major fluid system of the body and the key aspect of health. It is the waste system, the sewer system of the body, and it composes of 75% of the body's major fluids. The blood is 25% of the body's major fluids. The lymphatic system is the key aspect to health and well-being. If the lymphatic fluid stagnates, your health will deteriorate, and that is the cause of all disease right there. Go back and see the Truth About Cancer video in order to gain the full context of what I'm talking about here. But in the physiology, the lymph is the most important fluid in the body, and the blood delivers nutrition to the cells, and the lymph flushes the wastes from the cells through the kidneys, which filter the toxins out of the body. So the lymphatic fluid is the gateway out of the body. The blood is the nutrition, and the blood is the kitchen, and the lymph is the bathroom. Mainstream medical science still is under the impression that the lymph intermingles with the blood, but that is not true at all, because if the lymph mixed with the blood, you would be delivering toxins and acid waste metabolites of the cells back into the kitchen of your body. And you never poop in your kitchen. These two waters are divided. The blood system does not deal with waste filtration or with waste elimination of the cells. That is the lymph system's job. These two water systems in the body, these two fluids, are divided from each other. Marduk slicing Tiamat in half, made from her ribs the vault of heaven and earth. And from this her tail became the Milky Way, the serpent tail of the Milky Way, which, as I will show here, the Milky Way, the dark rift, the gape, the gap, the gaping void of the great goddess of the womb of the sky, of the abyss, is also the serpent goddess, the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, the rainbow serpent, which lies above. In Chaos Conf, the motifs of other mythologies linked directly or indirectly to the Tiamat myth, including Greek tradition of Apollo's slaying of the Python. And this ties in exactly to the Greek mythology, which comes from the Egyptian mythology, the bark of Ra, who battles with the serpent monster Apophis, the chaos monster, in order for the rule of the cosmos, the order to emerge from the chaos of the cosmos. In the Greek myth of Zeus battling the serpent monster Typhon for the rule of the cosmos. When Zeus slays Typhon, the serpent monster of chaos. And defeated, Typhon is cast down into Tartarus by the angry Zeus. The serpent water god Typhon, where we get the typhoon, the water storm of destruction. Hercules, who slays the Hydra. The clash of the Titans, referring to the primordial chaos, a cataclysmic era in the past of when the planets were according to Immanuel Velikovsky, were worlds in collision. The planets were in conflict, and vast electrical discharges being emitted between the two, the time of great cataclysm. And this relates to the field of cymatics, which is the sound resonance, where particles within a medium will vibrate at specific rates, at specific frequencies, and will achieve exceedingly increasing rates of higher order. But those periods of order have to transition through periods of chaos. And this is likely what happens in planetary solar systems throughout the universe, is when they enter energetic resonances of higher order, the particles, the planets within this medium will engage through periods of chaos until they achieve higher magnitudes of order or higher structure of order through those periods of chaos. The name Tiamat is a cognate for the word sea. Tiamat has also been claimed to be cognate with the Northwest Semitic Tehom, meaning the deeps, abyss, in the book of Genesis. Robert Graves considered Tiamat's death by Marduk as evidence for his hypothesis of an ancient shift in power from a matriarchal society to the later patriarchal society. Graves' ideas were later developed into the Great Goddess theory. Theory suggests that Tiamat and other ancient monster figures were presented as former supreme deities of peaceful, woman-centered religions that were turned later into monsters when violent. In other words, they were later demonized and cast down. Their defeat at the hands of the male hero corresponded to the manner in which male-dominated religions overthrew an ancient peaceful society. In Greek mythology, Poseidon sent the sea monster, the sea serpent monster Cetus, who was defeated by Perseus, who Perseus slayed the serpent sea monster. He slayed the Kraken, the monster of the deep waters. Poseidon and his Roman equivalent Neptune is the god of the deep blue sea. He carries the weapon of the trident, which is used for spearfishing, and the tip of which is represented by the Greek letter psi, which I will touch on later in the presentation. The mighty earth shaker Poseidon ruled the waves that the ancient seafarers depended upon, responsible for the destruction and the devastation, chaos and the wrath wrought by the sea, oceanic destruction. Shiva is part of the Hindu holy trinity of the creator, preserver, and he is the destroyer. Shiva is the phallic principle. In his fierce aspects, he is often depicted slaying demons. So he is the male phallic aspect of the Holy Trinity, the destroyer who slays the demons, and slaying the serpent principle in the sexual creation and destruction, because the act of sex can be used for either protection, creation, health, and preservation, and procreation, or it can be used for destruction and control in its unbalanced, in its malevolent form. Can be used for control and domination and power over another, rather than personal power, which emerges from within through the divine sacred marriage, the sacred union. And that is why the aspect of Shiva is again depicted with the serpent wrapped around his neck in a benevolent form, signifying that he is ascended. He has come to a perfected state of ascension and overcome the destructive nature of the serpent within himself. He has risen the Kundalini. He has risen the Uraeus. And again, as I've covered in the previous presentation, when you see one holding the serpent, it signifies that they've tamed the serpent. And again, as I've covered in my previous presentation, the demon goddess is associated to the feminine. He is the epitome of the Shiva Lingam, the act of sex, Shiva and Shakti, where the two divine masculine and feminine principles converge. Now I want you to grasp fully why I have included this segment into the presentation, is because other than just the obvious surface similarities between Shiva and Neptune, Shiva is the destroyer, third and final aspect of the Trinity of God. God as an acronym of generation, operation, and dissolution. So Brahma is the generator, the creator. Vishnu is the preserver, represented by the fish god. So again, Vishnu is depicted as the fish god, which became the later Philistine depiction of the fish god Dagon, coming from the Hebrew word of dag, meaning fish. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the word dragon means a serpent, a huge serpent, a giant sea fish, which is why Vishnu is represented by the yoni aspect of the yoni stone in the Shiva lingam. In other words, the yoni stone, as we've covered already thoroughly, is the female vagina, the fish, the ichthys. So Vishnu is the fish, the vagina, the ichthys. So Shiva is the destroyer. So Shiva penetrates the fish. Shiva penetrates the Vesica Pisces, the yoni, which is why he carries the symbol of the trident, which is used for spearfishing. In other words, he's spearing the Vishnu, he's spearing the yoni, the vagina. He is penetrating the vagina, penetrating the womb. So this is the very same concept of Osiris, who was cut into 14 pieces, and his phallus was thrown into the river by Set, and his phallus was consumed by the fish. In other words, his penis was swallowed by the vagina. So Brahma, the first, the creator, represents the process of evolution. Vishnu, the preserver, represents the operations of everyday life, the preservation of life itself, the carrying on, the reproduction of the life cycle. While Shiva represents the involution, in other words, the journey within, meaning the journey into. And this is why he's represented by the entire Shiva lingam, by the entire process of sex and regeneration itself, which is the journey into, the journey within, the journey into the womb, the journey within yourself, the journey into her. And I'm going to tie into, again, what the Shiva lingam represents here. The lingam stone represents here as well, and branching into other mythology and other theology as well. And on a side note, this is exactly why the Kaaba stone at Mecca in Islam is the black stone. It is the black yoni stone of the black abyss. The black fertility stone, again, just like the Shiva lingam stone, the black stone, just like the black stone of Jeb in Egyptian, the black stone of the primordial creation, of the primordial abyss. The lingam stone, which penetrates the female womb, is all about the aspect, again, of creation. The lingam stone represents the world pillar, the phallic pillar, the support structure, that which supports the supporting nature. And this represents the axis mundi, the cosmic pillar, the male aspect of creation, the support structure. And this ties directly into the Egyptian depictions of Jeb and Nut, which I will cover here in just a moment, and how this ties directly in. The Benben was the mound of primordial creation that arose from the primordial waters Nu, upon which the creator god Atum settled. The Benben stone is also known as the Pyramidion, and it's the capstone of the pyramid, also related to the capstone, the Benben stone, on the obelisk. So we're talking about the tip of the penis, which emerges from the primordial waters of the goddess. Arose out of the waters of chaos, the primordial mound of the goddess. The primordial mound of the goddess, of her mons pubis, her mound, the mount of primordial creation. When you mount in the act of creation, this is where you mount her. And in case you think I'm making this up, mons comes from Latin mountain, used in English in various anatomical senses, especially the mons veneris, or the mons, which is also called the mons pubis in medical anatomy. The mons veneris is Latin for Venus. So mons veneris is mountain of love, or the mount of Venus, the mount of love, representing the fleshy eminence atop the vaginal opening. Her mound. So this is exactly why now you know why in ancient cultures they have the ancient sacred burial mounds, what are called tumulus, or plural tumuli, which is the sacred burial mound, the mound where you come from the womb and you end back up in the tomb of the earth. The tomb, you end back up in the womb of the goddess, the womb of the mother, from womb to tomb. And this is why it's called a tumulus, which is the mound of Atum. It's Atum. So now you know, finally, once and for all, where the tombstone comes from and why we put up the tombstone. The Benben stone, which is the lingam stone and the burial mound. So now you know exactly why they have the ancient serpent mounds. The ancient serpent mound of the serpent swallowing the egg. The ancient serpent burial mounds. Nu, or feminine Nut, is the deification of the primordial watery abyss in the Hermopolitan Ogdoad cosmogony of ancient Egyptian. I raised them up out of the watery mass. The name has also been compared Coptic Nun, abyss, deep. The ancient Egyptians envisaged the oceanic abyss of the Nun, or the Nun, as surrounding a bubble in which the sphere of life is encapsulated, representing the deepest mystery of their cosmogony. In ancient Egyptian creation accounts, the original mound of land comes forth from the waters of the Nun. The Nun is the source of all that appears in a differentiated world. The name Nu is spelled phonetically with the NW hieroglyph of the bowl, or the jar containing the waters, or the womb containing the waters of the goddess, which is why the name is Nu, as in the new one, the birth, the creation, the procreation, the creation of the new life. Even so, Nu was sometimes represented by a sacred lake, or as at Abydos, or the abyss, the Abydos, by an underground stream, is what Nu was depicted by. a sacred lake or an underground stream of the waters of the goddess. So the sacred mountain is a phallic as well as a feminine representation. The sacred mound, the primordial mound of creation, the Benben stone, the mound which rises from the waters of chaos, as well as the phallic pyramid, the phallic structure which stands erect, which reaches towards the heavens. This brings us to the Egyptian sky goddess called Nut, whose name means sky, and whose symbol is the hieroglyph of the water pot, or the water pot is the hieroglyph and the symbol of the goddess womb, the uterus, the water pot. Remember, one of the first words I ever looked up in the dictionary way back in elementary school referring to sex was called sex pot, was a sex pot. And so this gives a whole new understanding to why that is. It's the female, the water pot, the womb. The uterus. Nut was the expanse of the sky, of the particularly the night sky, often depicted as the cow. And this is the significance of her counterpart Jeb, who is beneath her, depicted with the immense extending phallus. Nut and Jeb were constantly having sex to create life. The deity Shu, the god of air, who holds up Nut into the sky, and which mates with the earth. Jeb, the god of the earth. And so the sky mates with the ground, mates with the earth. And this is why you bust your nut. And this is why there is the hieroglyphic emphasis. Holding up of Shu, emphasizing particularly the breast and the vagina, or in other words, the breast, which is the Milky Way galaxy, and the uterus, the womb. According to the Egyptians, during the day the heavenly bodies would make their way across the sky. Then at dusk they would be swallowed, pass through Nut's belly during the night to be reborn again at the dawn. So in other words, when the sun and the moon go into the underworld, dip below the horizon, they go through the belly of the underworld of the goddess, and they are reborn again the next day at the dawn. Nut is the metaphorical proverbial barrier between the ordered cosmos of the world and the forces of chaos beyond, or in other words, the watery abyss of the womb of the goddess beyond the order of the world. One of the sacred symbols of Nut was the ladder used by Osiris to enter her heavenly skies, or in other words, to enter her heavenly womb. And the ladder, as I've covered in the previous series, is the symbol of the world pillar, the cosmic pillar, the axis mundi, the male phallic, the ladder, Jacob's ladder to heaven, the ascension process into the heavens. In other words, in the microcosm of the body, it's the spine, the ascension to the heavens. But in the macrocosm, it is the world phallic pillar. It is the ascension into the womb of the goddess, of the sky, of the universe. Jeb and Nut are one of the enigmas of mythology, as the roles of traditional roles of all the later mythologies are reversed, whereas it's typically the Sky Father Oranos, or the Sky Father and the Earth Mother. But in the Egyptian cosmology, it was reversed. It was it was the Earth Father and the Sky Mother. The ancient Egyptian texts speak of all life pouring from the union between Nut and Jeb, or in other words, the Proto-Indo-European root for God, to pour from the heavens, to pour a libation. And this is also another direct reason why Shu is depicted as being the world pillar between the earth and the heavens, because the human body is literally the world pillar, is literally the divine connection between heaven and earth. We are the gap, we are the bridge between heaven and earth. Rainbow Bridge. The Norse Bifrost, the rainbow bridge between heaven and earth. So the human body, you and I, are the microcosm of the world axis mundi, or the cosmic axis, the world pillar, the axis of the earth. The axis mundi is the connection between heaven and earth. So in other words, it's the Shishumna of the earth. It is the connection between the higher and the lower realms, between the universe and the earth, which is what each of us are. We are literally a microcosmic connection between the universe and the earth. Our feet connected to the ground and our head in the stars, what is known as the stellar man. So we are the spiritual antenna of the universe. We perceive the images and the thoughts of the universe, and we enact those thoughts through our actions. We create life. We create things with our hands. In other words, we are the organisms within the body of the earth that come together to create organizations, to create bodies of peoples within the earth. And an organ means that which does work. So we are literally the organs within the body of the earth. We are the organisms that make up the larger body of the earth. And this spot, the axis mundi, is what is considered as the omphalos, or the navel of the world. Omphalos means sacred stone. Coming from Greek omphalos, literally navel, or also a hub, as the central point. From Proto-Indo-European ombhalo, from the root om, meaning navel. The omphalos is the name of the rounded stone in the shrine at the Temple of Delphi, related omphalic. Often relating to or referring to the umbilical cord of the earth, in other words, the womb of the mother, which provides nourishment. Many allegories and natural objects have been used to depict the axis mundi, from the mountain, the tree, the vine, the stalk, a pillar, anything that is a phallic pillar, the phallic representation. The stories of Jack and the Beanstalk, Jacob's Ladder, Stairway to Heaven. And this is why every mythology and every culture reveres the sacred mountain. The sacred mount, or what's known as the world mountain, because the mountain is the unification, the male phallic unification between the feminine womb, or the universe. It is the highest point, because the ancients revered the highest point that they could become to God, because the gods were in the skies, where God is, and at the highest point. And this is why the elites have always revered the highlands, and all the royalty have the highlands, where the slaves and the serfs work the lowlands, the low valleys, and they work the fields, and they plow and labor away and toil away in the fields, while the elites scrape the cream off of that labor and reap the luxuries up in the highlands. And again, the human body expresses the symbol of the world pillar, of the world axis. The esoteric depictions of the Tree of Life, again, as I've covered in the previous series, being the Tree of Life is the human genetics, being the microcosm of the macrocosm. The human body being the Tree of Life and the Tree of Knowledge of good and evil. the human body and the human nervous system being the tree of life. So again, in the previous presentation of the series, I've covered the cranial vault as the vault of heaven. And so again, this is going to come up here as well. The cranial vault and the vault of heaven is the ark or the arch of the covenant between the two hemispheres. The ark of the covenant that conjoins the two hemispheres, that oversees the two hemispheres. And again, this is referring to the human brain. And again, the triumvirate section, the triune brain of the base, the midsection, and the vault, or the cerebrum, which again is the tripartite of the problem, reaction, solution. The base being the reptilian the R complex, being the fight or flight response, the survival, which is the unconscious nature. It is the abyss, it is the base, the abysmal. And then the emotional complex, the mammalian complex, refers to the emotions, or in other words, the subconscious, the reaction, what gets us to respond to the problem. First, there is a problem. The emotional response is how we respond to that problem. And then we have the highest portion of the brain, which is the functional, the rationing, the reasoning, and the logic, which comes up with the solutions to the problem and the reaction to that problem. And thus we have the solution, the problem, reaction, solution. So we have the base, the abyss, the subconscious, the unconscious, the depths, the black of the abyss, the deep subconscious nature. Then we have the emotional complex. We have the conscious mind. And then we have the superconscious mind, which transcends rational thinking and which is inherent knowing, the source of all knowledge, the source of knowing. And again, as I showed earlier, how this also plays out and corresponds directly to the human physiology, to the body at large, being the root of the base of the spine, the root of the spine being the abyss, the depths, with the heart center, the heart chakra level, being at the subconscious, being the emotional level, and then the crown being the illumination, the crown being the conscious or the superconscious, the capstone. So again, how this trinity plays out through every aspect of creation, from the physiology to the psychology to the theology and the mythology to the anatomy as well. So again, this is the pattern, this is the pater, the pattern of nature and the pattern of creation. And the pattern of structure, which again gives rise to the world pillar or the cosmic pillar, which in the human body is we see again as the image of the tree. And again, the tree is the trinity layers, the depths, the roots, or the root, or the abyss, the bottom, the base, and then the trunk being the support structure, the pillar, canopy being the branches, the illumination, the light. So you have the dark, the depths, the abyss, the underworld, ascending up into the heavens towards the light, from darkness into light, as all of nature and all of life goes. So as I briefly touched upon the Tree of Life and the Tree of Knowledge in the previous presentation of the series, again I will touch upon and expand a little bit further here as the Tree of Knowledge being the tree of your mind, the tree of your brain, the tree of your central nervous system. And this corresponds and correlates to the larger fractal portion, which is the tree of all of life in existence, the phylogenetic tree of life, which encompasses all of living organisms, even ones without a central nervous system or without the centralized tree of life within their own body, such as the human organism, which again, it's the central tree of life within the body. It is your central nervous system, the dendritic patterns, which a dendrite comes from the root of pertaining to a tree. And the reason for this dendritic pattern of all of nature is that all of nature in this electric universe is electric. It is dendritic, meaning it follows the tree pattern. It is electric. Semitic interpretation of the unconscious is the Sheol, the underworld. The Hebrew Bible supports the descriptions of the Sheol, which suggest that it is something more than just a place. In terms of sheer numbers, of the amount of anthropomorphic descriptions is significant. Sheol is either portrayed by means of human qualities, as in Job 26:6, Canticles 8:6 as desire, and Isaiah 5:14, or it's attributed with the elements of the human anatomy, the womb. In addition, Psalm 49:15 praises the Elohim who are said to ransom one's soul from the hand of Sheol. Proverbs 27:20 acknowledges Sheol's insatiability, whereas Isaiah 5:14 depicts Sheol as a gargantuan monster. As such, it may have been borrowed from the Hebrews and incorporated into the early belief system. What is more, some scholars argue that Sheol, understood anthropomorphically, fits the semantic complex of the other ancient Near Eastern death deities, such as Nergal, Ereshkigal, and Mut. An Egyptian, Ma'at, is the goddess of the underworld, who is responsible for judging the souls of the dead against the scales of truth. She is truth and justice. She is the scales of balance. She is Libra, the kidneys in the body, which judge the balance between the underworld and the upper regions. The kidneys are the scales of balance between the underworld and the worlds above. Libra at the direct midline, the balancing point between as above, below, and so below. So the Sheol is literally the she-hole, and this is not secular etymology here. Sheol doesn't actually come from she-hole, but it is related directly to the she-hole. It is referring to the goddess underworld, the underworld of the earth, the abyss, which is why the Sheol is a direct correlation to shale. When you look at the depictions of the Sheol, it is an oil reservoir beneath the ground. It is a reservoir of oil, which is where we get shale oil, and which is why we have Shell oil, because it's an oil reserve within the underworld from the ground. So again, this is just a direct alliteration to the tomb of the earth, where we return to the dark womb of the earth. So you can believe whatever the hell you want to believe, but the ancient peoples, the ancient cultures, the ancient wisdom, they likened the sky to waters above, because in the nighttime, when you are observing the stars in the heavens above, the black sky, the black abyss above, is the exact same color and a mirror reflection of the dark waters, which reflects the black of the sky. So you have the black of the waters below and the black of the waters above. So they did not differentiate between the two. It's just a metaphor. It's an allegory. They are telling the story as if it is waters above, because the image of the night sky reflects exactly the image of the waters below on earth. From Latin firmamentum, literally meaning a support, a strengthening, which is a verb. To support, to strengthen, steadfast, enduring. It's translated Hebrew rakia, a word used of both the vault of the sky and the floor of the earth in the Old Testament. literally expanse, from raka, meaning to spread out, as in her expanse, her gaping void, her holy hole, to spread out, spread eagle, which makes firm or makes you solid. She makes you firm, a support, a strengthening, to make strong. When she spreads out, when she spreads her expanse to you, it makes you firm or makes you solid. The firmament, which supports the vault of heaven, as I've covered in the last series, which you need to go back and understand how the vault of heaven relates to is referring to the body, the various places as above, so below in the body, the sexual regions as well as the brain and the skull, the mind. So I want you to pay attention here. What you're looking at is again Jeb and Nut, and Jeb impregnates the sky. The earth impregnates the sky, so what you're looking at again is the world pillar, the cosmic pillar, a direct correspondence with the human skull. As depicted here, you have the human spine as the cosmic pillar, the world pillar, which supports the vault of heaven, the cranial vault. You have the cosmic pillar, the world pillar, which supports the cranial vault. So in other words, you have the omphalos of the world, which impregnates the cranial vault, which impregnates the sky. So you have the pillar which impregnates the sky. And again, as I showed a second ago, with the power symbol, again you have the phallic which impregnates the arch, the archway. The arch is feminine, the curve is feminine, the phallic is the pillar. So in the human body you have the diencephalon, the basal ganglia, which impregnates the neocortex, the human spine, which impregnates the vault of heaven. This is universal cosmology, the macrocosm of the microcosm within the macrocosm. This is the torus dynamic. Exact same story of a Greek mythology of Atlas, of the Titan Atlas, who is a personification of the mountains, who holds up or supports the celestial sphere. Hyginus emphasizes the primordial nature of Atlas by making him the son of Ether and Gaia. In other words, the son of space and earth, the pillar of support, the support structure of the celestial sphere above the sphere of the earth. Atlas's symbol is the globe, which is why we have the atlas, which is where we get the atlas bone of the spine, which is the atlas bone of the spine, which supports the globe of the skull, the microcosm of the macrocosm. The vault of heaven and the vault of heaven below the waist, below the belt. Which brings us to the Egyptian halls of Amenti, the underworld. Amenti. Ament is a person born an idiot, meaning crazy, from the suffix ment, of Latin mentum, which is added to verb stems, sometimes to represent the result or the product of the action. Amentia is a mental deficiency, from Latin amentia, meaning madness. Amentum, mad. Mentum, mind. And an ament and an ament is a person born an idiot, from Latin amentia. Amenti, the halls of madness, the halls of chaos of the underworld, of the dark abyss, the halls of ignorance, of chaos, of madness, of the underworld. Latin amentia, amentum, mad. From the root of men, to think or remember, which gives us mind, our mental. An ament is someone without the power of the mind. An ament, an idiot, a person born without the power of the mind, born an idiot. Amentia, madness of the underworld, of the madness, chaos of the abyss. I want to make mention that for most of you already know that the ancient Hebrews were actually so dumb that they literally believed that there were holes, a solid firmament of the sky, from which the rainwater actually came down through these holes from the waters above this solid dome, and that's what made it rain. That's how dumb these ancient Hebrews actually were, called the windows of heaven. Whereas if you actually compare the ancient Hebrew conception of the universe to the human skull, then you actually start to get a clear picture as to that there is cerebrospinal fluid above the structure of the brain. There is cerebrospinal fluid which is separated by the firmament of the arachnoid layer that divides the cerebrospinal fluid from the cerebrospinal fluid in the base of the skull, or in the third and fourth ventricles where it's produced. And so this cerebrospinal fluid circulates throughout the body, as I will mention here further in the presentation. And there are literal gaps in this arachnoid layer. There are holes, there are windows of heaven from which the cerebrospinal fluid can escape outward, and it can escape into the superior sagittal sinus. But it does not come in through these windows of heaven, it escapes outward. And the cerebrospinal fluid circulates down through to the base of the spine, and then it circulates back up the spine. And what circulates this pump is pressure mediations of deep breathing and pressure mediations between hot and cold. And this is one of the key aspects for health. Earlier in the presentation I mentioned that the lymph, the clear water, must be kept clean and pure in order to maintain a healthy state. Well, the same is true for the cerebrospinal fluid. It must be kept pure, and it must be kept clean and healthily circulated. This is why stretching and meditation and exercise is so important, as well as sweating and breath work, deep breath work, because these are the only things that circulate the lymph system, the lymphatic system, as well as the cerebrospinal fluid. Because both of these two crucial systems of water in the body do not have a circulatory system. They do not have their own pump system. They have to be pumped manually.
Snake has always been the symbol of fertility, rebirth, and renewal, shedding of the old skin of the old self and being reborn into your new skin. The snake emerges from its den, or its dark, dank hole in the ground. The underworld. All life, everything in nature and everything in this universe emerges from the darkness, aka the black hole, which is a vaginal innuendo as far as physics is concerned. This is nothing other than simply sexual innuendo regarding the physics of things like black holes, the anatomy of as above, so below, the belt. We're referring to the underworld, the abyss, the dark hole, the primordial waters of the goddess. This is why the snake represents sex and fertility, because it enters in and out of the hole of the nether regions, where it resides, in the ground, as well as in anatomy. The male serpent resides in the female hole, the female cave. Darkness represents or represents the feminine nature, because the goddess is negative in nature, and negative not as in bad, just simply negative polarity, as in two polarities, and the female is the negative aspect, the negative polarity, where the male is the positive. Electricity, you have an outlet, a male and a female outlet. The male deposits the inserts into the female outlet. Thus her organs are inward. Her energy contracts. Her sexual energy is contracting. It is centripetal, meaning it sucks within, it sucks into. This is directly relating to physics and magnetism. In physics, you have centripetal convergence and centrifugal divergent forces, two forces of nature. There is expansion and contraction. Everything in nature breathes in and out in an ebb and flow. So the female energy, her essence is magnetic, as in Magdalene, as in magic. The root word of mag being female, magnetic. Her essence is water. It's cool, wet, moist, which is why she's associated with the cave, the caverns, the dark hole that leads to the underworld, to the abyss, into the ground where caves go.
This is a segment from Sonia Bonacci. From the earliest conception of man, the sacred egg represented the origin of life and the secret of being. In the ancient Greek Orphic tradition, it was known that the universe originated from within the silver cosmic Orphic egg. This particular egg is depicted with a serpent coiled around it, much in the same way that DNA is tightly coiled around the histone molecules called the chromatin within the chromosomes of a human somatic cell. As the image illustrates, the core of a nucleosome consists of 8 protein molecules, called histones. This 8 bead-on-bead-like structure is the exact same geometry as the star tetrahedron known as the Merkaba, also the seed of life, known as the Star of David, in 2-dimensional form of the same geometry, which is the cube. The creator god, which emanated from the waters of the Orphic egg, was both male and female, dualistic in nature, just as the Star of David, or the hexagram, consists of two tetrahedrons of opposite polarity spiraling into each other. So again, as I've covered, these are the two polarities, the male and the female. The hexagram, which is correspondingly the sexagram. It is the male triangle, upward, fire, corresponding to the female element, water, downward triangle, downward tetrahedron. And these two tetrahedrons, these two polar vortexes, these vortices, they intersect and they create the magnetism of all life. It is the structure and the fundamental foundation of this universe. It's how everything in this universe works, electromagnetically, through these twin vortices.
All life moves between two polarities. Without opposite poles, there can be no attraction and no repulsion. Without attraction and repulsion, there can be no movement. And without movement, no life. All that lives moves between an upward spiral toward growth and purification, or downwards through deterioration and degeneration towards death. But within nature, both forces always work in cooperation with each other.
It was believed that this winged god created all the other gods as above, just as the nucleosomes are entwined within the genetic blueprint required for the creation of so below, here on Earth, which corresponds to the Egyptian deity called Neph, or Kneph, which was also depicted as the winged egg. Looking at the ancient mythological and spiritual teachings of cosmology, we clearly understand we're all about and inspired by the cycles and movements of the heavens and planetary bodies above. With the aid of the electron microscope, we're now able to delve deeper within the intracellular structures of the human cell, and perhaps come to understand how these stories are reflected within the physiological processes of the human body, what we coin as astrophysiology. And again, it's the divine nature, this is the divine wisdom of the human temple. So most foundational creation myths or stories were founded upon the primordial creation springing forth from the golden egg, or the cosmic Orphic egg. The Hindus had several creation stories or creation myths, but one of their myths was that Brahma hatched forth from a golden egg. The Egyptians also had the original creation story was the primordial cosmic egg was laid on the primordial waters by the Bennu bird, which was an Egyptian rendition of the phoenix, and it became associated with the ibis, which this is actually the significance of the Vatican court of the pine cone today, which is the pine cone, or in other words, it's the acorn, the golden egg shaped, as I will cover here throughout the presentation. Or which is the Benben stone, arising from the primordial waters of creation, which is why the overarching vault of heaven looms above the Benben stone, just as in the Egyptian goddess Nut looms over the Omphalos stone of Jeb, which is why the pine cone stone, the pineal stone, is surrounded by the Bennu birds, which are the peacocks. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, the golden egg is the significance of being the golden mean ratio. There are several mathematical ways to construct an egg, and one of those ways is using the phi golden ratio. which is the pentagonal structure of constructing the egg. The egg can be constructed using the sine wave, which explains why the mythology is of the egg being laid upon the primordial waters, because it is constructed of the sine wave, the wave of creation. The egg can be constructed out of the Vesica Pisces. So in other words, the egg is the seed of life. And as I just covered here in the video, we mentioned the sacred geometry of the egg called the egg of life, which is the cosmic Orphic egg, which gives rise to all life in the universe. It is the mathematical pattern, the structure of all life, from which brings forth all life. So most every creation story has the golden egg, which is laid by the bird. This is the origin of the story of the goose laying the golden egg. Again, the Egyptian creation myth of the Bennu bird, which laid the golden egg upon the primordial waters, which is the story of human life. The human also emerges forth from the cosmic egg, which is surrounded by the primordial waters. We are surrounded by the amniotic sac, which is our primordial egg, our cosmic golden egg. So we hatch forth from the cosmic egg, surrounded by the primordial waters of the birth of the new life. So the golden egg is the mathematical ratio, the phi ratios, which actually include the sizes, the circumference, the radius of the Earth to Moon ratio, which is the Pythagorean triangle, which is known as the Earth-Moon egg. To quote Richard Merrick, things like the Earth-Moon system matches the geometry of a hen's egg in that both are a containment property of the golden mean. Knowledge of this cosmic egg geometry was apparently well known in the ancient world. The ancient Egyptian fable of the goose that laid the golden egg speaks this wisdom in philosophical terms long before Aesop wrote his fables. The Great Pyramid of Khufu made it real. This triangular building was once a temple to the mathematics of the Earth-Moon egg system, celebrating the golden mean in nature for all to see. The Egyptians knew that this divine proportion contained everything and all things originated from it, bringing the world into a fine balance for life to evolve. The order out of the chaos. cosmos out of chaos. And people like Chiron Last falsely associate this to crazy assumptions and ridiculous beliefs, where it's actually the mathematical ratios, the golden egg ratio, the golden mean ratio of the Earth to Moon, the Pythagorean triangle, which was also incorporated the mathematics and the size ratios, the schematic ratios of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which also contained within it the ratios of phi and pi, and everything from the speed of light to the size, the circumference of the Earth, as well as the ratios of the Sun to the Moon, and all of these cosmic numbers, which I would love to include the clip from the revelation of the pyramids to display all of these mathematics to you, because the math is not my specialty. Victor Schauberger created implosion impeller inventions based upon this phi pentagonal golden egg.
Victor set to work to build a machine that would produce good drinking water artificially. It would copy the natural processes of bubbling mountain spring water. His first plan for a water purifier developed into this egg-shaped apparatus for what became known as biosynthesis. In this process, small amounts of trace minerals and carbon dioxide are added to the water, which is then energized in darkness, set into a harmonious spiral motion by the specially shaped agitator. The dynamics of the water flow are simplified in this diagram. A cooling coil provides the temperature control, and the vessel is enclosed in an insulating shell to contain the implosion energy within. The egg shape, another of nature's secrets, was chosen by Victor as a perfect form for a vortex chamber. An egg has a perfect curve for sustaining the momentum of a vortex within it. A central theme of Victor's thinking was the cycloid space curve, observed in the motion of the planets as they orbit around the Sun, while at the same time spinning on their own axes. They move in open spirals, or eggways, as Victor called them. The spiral pipe incorporates this characteristic. It is conical and generally egg-shaped, except for an inner bend which causes the water to roll inwards, as shown in Victor's egg geometry. Word soon spread that Victor Schauberger could make living water, and people streamed to his home to try it. With excellent results, he became known as the water magician. The vitality of water can be measured by its electrical potential. Every drop manifests an electromagnetic field, as does every body on Earth. The structure of moving water consists of layers, and from the outside layer towards the center, there is an increased density and an increase in electrical potential,
which the egg is associated to the menstruation. So this is a crucial aspect of this presentation, is the ophis and the ovum. The ovum is the egg, the oval. The ovoid, which is a three-dimensional egg shape, is called an ovoid. In other words, an ovoid. The oval of the goddess Yoni, of the cosmic Yoni. The ovum, the oval, the ovoid, the ovary, the monthly cycle of the moon and the menses, the menstruation. Which is why the moon holds sway over the cosmic waters, over the tides of the earth, over the primordial waters of the goddess. Which again, the oval comes from the Vesica Pisces, the goddess vagina, the cosmic yoni. And again, the golden egg contains the golden mean spiral, because it is constructed using the phi ratio, the pentagonal ratio of phi, which is the goddess, the 5, the number 5, the penta alpha of the goddess. So this brings us back to the serpent and the egg, and the ovary, which is the serpent mound, the primordial mound of the goddess, and the cosmic egg, the serpent eating the egg, or the serpent swallowing the egg, which is the fallopian tube, swallowing the ovary, which is the ovary. The ovum comes from the ovary, comes down the fallopian tube, just as the serpent consumes the egg, which is the exact depictions from the Garden of Eden, the serpent holding the egg, or the golden apple, the golden egg, which he gives to the goddess. So it's about the goddess and the creation, the fertility of life, the creation of life. The serpent and the egg, the sperm and the egg, the sperm and the ovum, which is the power symbol, the phallic and the feminine, the sperm and the egg, which is why the serpent guards the sacred fruit, the fruits of life, the egg of life. And so this again, we can bring this exactly microcosmically into the body. Once again, in a different way, is that the serpent represents the human spinal column. And that human spinal column, the Kundalini serpentine energy ascends up the spinal column to the pineal gland, inside the center of the skull, which the spinal column is the column which holds up the cosmic, which is the cosmic pillar. And the golden egg lies in the center of your brain, the thalamus, or the diencephalon, or the putamen, the putamen. So again, remember from the part 2 presentation where I depicted the ganglia, or the basal ganglia, being the aureus serpent. So again, this is why the spinal column and the egg, the serpent and the ovis and the ovum, the spinal column and the thalamus within the brain, which again, this is a summation of everything that I've shown in this presentation. And again, this is the significance of the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, or Osiris climbing the ladder to heaven, and Jacob ascending the ladder to heaven, where he comes face to face with God and is names this place Peniel, or Pineal. Because again, this is the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, where he ascends the ladder, where he climbs the spinal ladder to heaven and attains the golden egg laid by the golden goose. And then he returns to earth with the golden egg, the golden mean ratio, the creation of life, bringing forth of life into matter. And how Jack is the same as Jacob, the Jacob, Yaakov. So this is the very same story as Jacob's ladder, as Jacob who ascends the ladder to heaven, just as Osiris ascends the ladder to heaven, which again I've covered the Jacob's ladder story in the previous presentation of the series. All of these myths, these stories, and these archetypes are referring directly to the anatomy and the physiology of the human body, of the temple, the inner temple.
Darkness is universally perceived as evil simply because the darkness is associated with all things representing death and unconsciousness. In other words, the nighttime, when the sunlight goes away and it dies, when all the monsters come out, when the nocturnal predators would come out and threaten the very survival of primordial man around the campfire. This is why the light is perceived as good and the darkness is perceived as evil. Because the darkness is the very basic human survival mechanism, where the predators, the nocturnal predators, come out and prey upon man. Because he's not an apex predator. So, yeah, because man is not a carnivore. He's not an apex predator by nature, by evolution. We've developed tools to consider ourselves apex predators, but in nature we are not apex predators. So this aspect of the fear of the dark is the very root of all human fear, especially fear of the dark. It's the unconscious nature within us that is the very aspect and essence of fear, which is why we perceive things as dark and darkness as evil, and thus why the feminine is perceived as evil, why the feminine was always perceived as a demon. And a demon is related to the dark nighttime, is related to the female goddess. This is why the female goddess has been demonized.
The downward decline of descent into the demonic realm of the underworld, which is the degrade, the decline of the season. When the summer declines, it dies into the winter season. So obviously it's not all of these dark, black, shadowy aspects are nothing to fear. I mean, that's what they want us, is to be afraid of the dark, to be afraid of the underworld, where all the secrets are kept.
Yes, and the word dark, what means D and arc. D is like a pyramid, if we would see at the letter how it looks like, which has a fire in the middle, because pyramid is fire in the middle, and we have arc. So it means we have the fire in the middle, the pyramid, which opens that arc. So through darkness we can go and see light, because we have the opposite.
Of course, the light shines into the dark, and that's what gives birth to life, is that spark.
Is that spark. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that letter D is also as a prism, because when light goes through the prism, we have the other 7 spectrum of the other colors. So it's actually saying that the word dark, it really is the opening of the gates of the arc, with the colors of the prism.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, I was thinking about that, and I wrote something down a while back, how that spirit, that light descends into the water or matter, and from there on binds to earth through water, right? Then ascends again and sets the matter free and takes the water. Now your body is almost 80% water, so the fiery spirit must go through the air, which is mind, to water, matter, which is the body. So that's the interconnected sexual divine unity of male and female that it passes through on its way to the Red Sea, the blood, to manifest in matter. So there it is, through love, through that unity, the fire descends into the matter, water body. And just look at the alphabet from A to Z, from head to toe. If you line up the alphabet on the 26 letters from head to toe, it works that way too. In German, our word for toe is C, which is Z-E-H. Head to toe, the Z, from A to Z, same thing. And if you lined it up on the body, the alphabet, you get A, B at the top.
So I forget if I've already mentioned this earlier in the presentation or if this will come later in the presentation, but either way I will be making mention of how Ab is the father, Hebrew Ab, meaning the father, the A and the B, the first and the second, the alpha and the beta, the Ab, the father. Well, I'm going to cover here that this refers to the golden section, the golden ratio, the A and the B, the A side and the B side, the beside which sits beside the A, B side which sits beside the A side. That reminds me of the Ab being the Ab being the father, and obviously the Ab being the father is also the head, or Aries, which is the Abba. It's the Abraham, the ram. The ram of which is Aries, the head. So that's why the Ab, the A and the B would of course be at the head.
And the hippocampus is what we call Ammon's horn.
And again, how this relates to the pater, the pattern of the universe, the pattern of the creation of form, of physical form and structure in life, the structure, physical structure of nature, the physics, the physical structure of nature, the pater, the pattern, the ab, the father, the A and the B, the golden mean section, the golden ratio, the golden egg, the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk.
So all of this leads us directly into the anatomy of as above, so below the waist, so below the belt. The correspondence of the sexual organs to what is below the belt to what is above the belt. Again, the pineal gland is the only gland in the one of the only glands in the human body, and it's the only gland in the human head that is unpaired, or in other words, it's asymmetrical. It's azygous, meaning it falls at the direct midline of the bilateral symmetry of the human form. So the only other organs in the human body that fall directly at the direct midline of the human bilateral symmetry is first the pineal gland, then you have the thyroid gland, then you have the thymus gland, and the only other gland that falls directly at the midline of the sushumna, the third pillar of the human body, is the penile gland, or the female clitoris, directly azygously, asymmetrically in the midline of the human body. And now I'm going to cover the direct connections between the pineal gland and the penile glands, female clitoris and the male glands.
The glands means acorn in Latin, also used of acorn-shaped things, which is etymologically linked to gland, from Latin glandula, gland of the throat or tonsil, diminutive of glands, meaning acorn, nut, acorn-shaped ball, which I will be getting into here in just a moment in the presentation. Pay attention, notice the shape of these glands, the shape of the organs that I am showing you. Notice the small acorn shape. As I mentioned previously in the presentation, the shape of the omphalos stone, the pine cone or the acorn shape, the Fibonacci phi ratio golden spiral, the hypertrochoid pattern, because this aspect is key.
And I'd figure we'll start at the top, basically at the top of the anatomy, to again link what I was describing, again the connection between the pineal gland and the penile glands, as we can obviously see the geometric similarity as well as the obvious symbolic similarity, the same representation, as well as what we can see here at the base of the thalamus. We can see that is where the pineal gland is located, and at the base of the penile glands is where we find the penile frenulum, which in the female anatomy, right here at the base of the glands, of the frenulum of the glands, would be the clitoris. In the female anatomy, what would be called the frenulum clitoridis. And again, as I had just mentioned, how the pineal gland is one of the only azygous glands within the human body, again following the direct midline down the center of the human body, or the sushumna, the midline, the third pillar of the human body, in the direct center of the bilateral symmetry of the left and right halves of the body. So again, one of the only other glands that falls along that midline is, you go all the way down, you've got the thyroid, the thymus, and then in the male anatomy, it goes down to the penile glands, is the only other gland in the male body that falls at the direct midline of the human body. And that corresponds in the female to the clitoris and the uterus. And again, I mentioned previously in the video about the pineal gland and the brainstem, or the pons and the medulla, as well as the thalamus, corresponding to a snake, corresponding to the Uraeus serpent of ancient Egyptian symbolism. And again, the pineal gland being the parietal eye, the snake eye, the eye of the snake, the one-eyed, the all-seeing eye, the one-eyed snake, which again directly corresponds to the penile glands. as well as this looks exactly like the clitoris in the female anatomy. And again, at the frenulum is exactly where the female clitoris would be located. So it's interesting, again, we have the Uraeus serpent, and it's funny how the male serpent, or the male penis, the male snake, excretes something called urea, which is the main component of urine. So you have the Uraeus serpent and the urea. But again, what corresponds to the male also corresponds directly to the female. So again, I just showed a slide with the markings on its hood, which obviously resembles a penis, but what most don't immediately recognize is that it also directly corresponds with the female uterus and the ovaries. So again, what corresponds with the male is exactly correspondent to the female as well. Because again, as I showed just a minute ago, both of the genitalia are exactly the same. There is no difference, other than the uterus, which is correspondent to the prostate. But again, the male anatomy is exactly correspondent to the female. And what we're looking at here is as above, so below the belt. We're looking at the sphenoid bone, which, again, if you missed my last video series about the symbols of power, the monarch symbolism, regarding the Moloch owl, the butterfly, and the bat symbolism of the sphenoid bone, go back and see that video, or else you won't know what I'm talking about here. So we're looking at the sphenoid bone, and as above, so below the belt. We're looking at the pelvis compared to the sphenoid bone, and we can see the obvious correspondence here. And what I failed to mention, I believe, in my last video, was this point right here, letter D, is actually what is called the vaginal process. So again, the vaginal process is located directly in the center point of the sphenoid bone. And in the pelvis, we would have the vaginal process would sit at the exact corresponding point. And notice you can even see the two different bone structures also have similar foramen in corresponding locations. And I found this image, surprisingly, as I was actually looking for the Vesica Pisces to relate to this innermost chamber here in the brain as well, to relate it to how certain segments of the fornix here directly correspond geometrically to the vagina, as well as the pineal relating to the clitoris. And I'll show that geometry here in a second. But what we can see is the Vesica Pisces here related to the geometry of a butterfly. So again, the Vesica Pisces relating to the innermost chamber here, the first, second, and third ventricles of the optic thalamus. And here, as I was just mentioning, we can see, again, which I mentioned was the innermost chamber, the fornix, the third ventricle, as well as the first and second ventricles of the optic thalamus. So this is an image that I found quite a while ago of a CT scan of the human brain is what we're looking at here. And as soon as I saw this, I immediately made a mental connection of the geometry that I was looking at. And what I immediately saw was how the Vesica Pisces fits here within the two hemispheres of the human brain, making up the geometry of this third ventricle, which falls direct midline of the bilateral symmetry of the human body. And so what we're looking at directly corresponds to the female vagina, or in other words, here we can see the prepuce right here of the clitoris, and here would be the clitoral frenulum, the frenulum clitoridis, which, as we can see, directly corresponds with the brain. Here we've got the two branches, which would be either the bulb of the vestibule or the two major labia, the labia majora, the two lips of the vagina, and again the frenulum of the clitoris, the frenulum clitoridis, here at the top, which joins the two. And yet again, as I was just describing, we can see the obvious geometric similarities and the correspondences between what is as above to what is below within the female anatomy. And again, as I was mentioning, we can see the similarities. You have the clitoris and the frenulum clitoridis, the body of the clitoris, within the human brain as well, as we can see the exact same corresponding geometry. And again, the vesica piscis making up the two hemispheres of the human brain, or at least the third ventricle within the human brain, the optic thalamus region, the ophthalmos, the all-seeing eye within the human body.
I was wondering if maybe you wanted to get together. I know there's a lot of stuff I'd like to say.
Whispering eye.
So if you get a chance, give me a call back and we can see each other. I'd love to see you.
And our whispering eye.
And your whispering eye. All right. Bye. Whispering eye.
It means vagina. It means vagina.
It's a classy move, man.
It means vagina.
Yeah. Get your whispering eye in the cab, Ozzy.
Where he mentions the vagina, a reference to the vagina, and he calls it a whispering eye. And it's a funny little joke there, but again, you have the all-seeing eye within the human body. And so, as is obviously apparent, as we know, is that the female anatomy has two sets of lips. You've got the lower lips, the labia majora, as well as the labia minora, and then you've got the obvious two lips of the mouth. And as I was just mentioning, within the optic thalamus region of the brain, I was mentioning again the frenulum clitoridis, as we could see in the human brain, and here we are looking at the correspondence between the tongue, and this image is flipped upside down to mirror the image of the frenulum clitoridis, which would actually be this invisible section right here on the outside, just beneath the clitoris right here. But again, we're seeing what is called the lingual frenulum. In other words, the lingual, etymologically linked to tongue, as in from Latin lingua, relating to the tongue. And again, I mentioned the female anatomy having two sets of lips, which refers to the word labia, which means lips, which the root word of lab. As I said, the female has two sets of lips. We all know that the male has two heads, as above, so below the belt. So again, as I was just mentioning, here we have an image of the developing human anatomy, of the human sexual anatomy, and what we're looking at again is the similarity between the male and the female, which, again, this is the prepuce, or in other words, what corresponds in religion to this is the Virgin Mary's, this is her hood. And just beneath that we have the glans clitoridis, which is the clitoris.
Hey there, little Red Riding Hood. You sure are looking good. You're everything big bad wolf would want. Little Red Riding Hood. I'd like to hold you if I could, but you might think I'm a big bad wolf, so I won't. Hey there, little Red Riding Hood.
What for lips you have?
This is her hood, and just beneath that we have the glans clitoridis, which is the clitoris. The glands, the male glands, is correspondent to the female clitoris. So we're looking at the similarity between the two genitalia. And what we're looking at is the progression over time of the different genitalias between the male and the female. So we're seeing that they have the exact same anatomy. And I was mentioning the vesica piscis in the human brain, and again how it corresponds to the clitoris here geometrically in the vesica piscis, where the clitoris is located in the vesica piscis, and that also corresponds to the male anatomy. Here is, obviously I couldn't find an adequate graphic to portray what I'm talking about, so I just drew this simple image of what we're looking at is actually the male glands. We're looking at the male penis head, which holds the same geometry of the vesica piscis as well. But so we're looking at how the male anatomy also follows the same sacred geometry, the vesica piscis, same as the female vagina, and again same as within the human brain. So both the male and the female both correspond to as above, so below the belt. And since we're on the male anatomy corresponding to the human brain, as above, so below the belt, here what we're looking at is the pituitary gland, which hangs down from the hypothalamus area. And as we're looking at this, it basically needs no explanation, although I'm here explaining it anyways. The similarity between the male genitalia and as above, so below the belt. The pituitary gland and the male testicles. So as above, so below the belt. Again, one of the only glands that falls at the direct midline of the human brain, and again, one of the only organs that falls at the direct midline of the human anatomy. And I mentioned how the female anatomy, the female has two sets of lips, the labia majora of the vagina as well as the lips of the mouth. So she's got what we like to joke about is her vertical smile as well as her horizontal smile. So the two lips, the labia. And here we're looking at the as above, so below the belt in the male anatomy, and what we know as the lingual frenulum, as well as the lingam frenulum, the penis, the penile frenulum. So again, as above, so below the belt. And when we get into the linguistics and the etymology of the lingam, again, the ling refers to the phallic. The lingual, comes from Latin lingua. In language, we have what's called the labial, meaning referring to the lips, as in a labial stop, which is a complete closure of the lips during speech, during discourse. When we look up the etymology of language, from language, the etymology of the root word lang or lang actually means long. When we look up language, refers to the tongue, the linguistics, from the Latin lingua, of the tongue, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European root of ding, meaning tongue. And this is the root word ding, the root phonetic sound ding, as in the ding-a-ling, as in the male lingam, so the tongue as it corresponds to the penis, the lingam and the lingua, the tongue and the penis. So we have the lingam and the lingua. And the root word of tongue, again, comes from Proto-Indo-European ding. So the ding-a-ling. The ding-a-ling. The penis and the tongue. Which brings us to the root word of ling, of longere. Of lingual is longere, to lick, to use the tongue, to lick. Longere, or could alternately be pronounced lingerie. And the secular etymology of lingerie refers to linen, but when we look at the lingerie, it's actually the long, thin string, or in other words, the ling, which when you look up etymologically of ling refers to things that are long and as in a penis. The male, the phallic, it's the male aspect. So this brings us back to the cunnilingus, using the tongue, is a compound word of cunny or cunnus, vulva. When you refer to a cunny, is known as the playboy bunny, which is the fertility of the bunny. The female bunny refers to the cunny. The rabbit, synonym for cunny, which comes from cunt, which is where we get the sexy fertility playboy bunny, the female bunny. So Latin cunnus, or vulva, the cunt, and to lick, longere, cunnilingus, to lick the cunt. And this is why a cunning linguist is always best at cunnilingus. As I said, the female has 2 sets of lips. We all know that the male has 2 heads. So this is called the diencephalon, and it's referred to as the cephalic portion of the brain, relating to the diencephalon, which etymologically comes from cephalic, pertaining to the head, from Latin cephalicus, from cephalicos, pertaining to the head. Cephalic contains the word phallic within it. Cephalic, pertaining to the head. As above, so below the belt. This brings us to the direct correspondence between the vocal cords and the vagina of as above, so below the belt. Therefore they shall know in that day that I am who speaks. Behold, I am. The vocal cords, along with the vagina, and as I'm covering here, as well as the third ventricle of the brain, are all represented correspondents of the all-seeing eye and the triangle, as I'm covering here in this segment. All 3 are intrinsically linked by form, function, and energy. The vocal cords are the gateway of our words, from where words are birthed or ejaculated into existence. The thyroid gland, as well in the throat, is a direct bilateral symmetrical representation, as I've already shown throughout this presentation, somewhat resembling the butterfly, again the bilateral symmetry. Hence the link between fertility problems and the thyroid gland. Many thyroid diseases such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis create problematic symptoms such as infertility. Hashimoto's is 7 times more common in women than in men. Some women experience thyroid issues after pregnancy, around 7%. Abnormalities in the thyroid function, and particularly hyperthyroidism, can have an adverse effect on reproductive health and result in reduced rates of conception, increased miscarriage risk, and adverse pregnancy and neonatal outcomes. Also mirroring the butterfly shape is the brain's 2 anterior horns of the lateral ventricles, when viewed as a cross-section from the superior view, or above. Also positioned penetrating of this bilateral symmetry is the septum pellucidum. Hyperthyroidism, or an overactive thyroid gland, can cause anxiety, irritability, and mood swings, while hypothyroidism can cause mental slowing and memory problems as well as depression. So the actual case is that all glands become hyper before they become hypo. In other words, they become overactive and struggling to produce the hormones that is necessary to achieve homeostasis in the body. And they're working so hard against these toxins in our body that they eventually burn themselves out from working too hard, and then they slow down and begin to stop working, and that is when they enter into the hypo state, or in other words, the underactive production. You start to see how all 3, the throat, the brain, and reproductive organs, are directly linked. Now this brings us to the uvula in the throat, or in the tonsils. It's positioned along the body's central meridian line, or in other words, the sushumna, just as the clitoris and the pineal gland, all of which are azygous. And all of these glands resemble the exact same shape. Which brings us back to what I wanted to show, how the clitoris directly corresponds. Clitoris comes from the related Greek noun form kleis, which has a second meaning of a key, a latch, or a hook, which is why the clitoris is like a latch or a hook on a door. Alternatively, perhaps related to Greek cleitus, a variant of clitus,
meaning side of a hill, itself related to clinin, to slope. So this is exactly why the clitoris is located on the side of the hill, or in other words, on the side of the pubic mons, the pubic mound, the mons pubis. From the same root as climax, and with the sense of little hill. Some ancient medical sources give a supposed Greek verb, klitoriazine, to touch or titillate lasciviously, to tickle. Compare German slang, der Kitzler, clitoris, literally the tickler. So this brings us to climax. Climax comes from Greek climax, literally ladder, from the root of clinin, to slope, which is the same root of clitoris. Series of steps by which a goal is achieved, to escalating steps. High point of intensity or development. So again, the steps, the ascension, the ladder to heaven. This is exactly why the climax, this is exactly why the climax is the culmination of the ascension of the ladder to heaven, which is why the orgasm is the experience of the rising of the energy to a heavenly experience, to a culmination, which I will explain further here in the presentation, which takes us back exactly to the direct linguistic as well as symbolic and functional correspondence. So the glans is literally the shape of an acorn, just as most glands. From Latin glandula, gland of the throat or the tonsil. So this etymologically directly links the glands of the penis and the clitoris to the throat, or in other words, the uvula. They are literally etymologically linked as well. All three are unique unto themselves, yet connected intrinsically between each other. The uvula hangs like a bunch of grapes. Comes from etymologically, uva is Latin for grapes. It contains glands that secrete saliva, the salt, the salvation, the salivation. Just as stimulation of the clitoris increases lubricant secretion production in the vagina, stimulation also causes the uvula to secrete throat lubricating saliva. So in other words, we have the direct link between the uvula and the clitoris, and the stimulation and secretion of the lubrication of the saliva, the salt, the salvation, the chrism, the oil, the cream, the secretion, the sacred secretion.
I'm shooting!
If those are the teeth, and that's the tongue, then that must be the uvula. Oh, so it's a girl house. What?
It's been suggested that the uvula is primarily an accessory speech organ, which is indeed what it is. The uvular sound is not present in any other life form but humans, and it is language which defines us from all other animals. In many languages, the uvula is used to articulate a range of consonant sounds, known as uvular consonants. It's responsible for the voiced uvular trill, written in the International Phonetic Alphabet as R. In the movie Deep Throat, a doctor identifies the main character's uvula as being her missing clitoris. This becomes a central plot for the movie that later became the namesake of the informant in the Watergate trials, leading to Richard Nixon's impeachment. Watergate. Interesting term. Stargate, the gateway, the gate of God, her gateway, her Watergate. In other words, the uvula produces the saliva, or the liquid, the fluid. It's the Watergate. It is the gateway, just as the vagina is the gateway. The tonsils can be likened to the kidneys. They're both filtering or filtration organs. And the tonsils are actually a giant lymph node within the body. They filter out toxins, and they should never be removed from the body. Removing your lymph nodes is literally like removing a septic tank from your sewer system. It will destroy the entire waste system, causing toxins to build up inside the body and causing disease and major issues to arise from that. So again, the lips represent the outer labia, and this is again relating to our sexual attraction, which is exactly why our obsession with painting the lips red is related to fertility. In other words, the fertility of the vagina, the fertility of sex and arousal. The more sexually explicit a culture is, the fuller the lips are required to be according to fashion and vice versa.
What for lips you have? What for lips you have?
Look at that flesh, pink and plump. Hello, little girl. Tender and fresh, not one lump. Hello, little girl. This one's especially lush, delicious. Hello, little girl.
So again, throughout this presentation, throughout the full presentation, I've covered the significance of the snake as well as related to sex and fertility. So during sex and procreation, we instinctively taste and explore with our tongue. We protrude it and flicker it and lick the skin and orifices of our partner. Humans also possess archaic remnant of the vemeronasal sensory organ of the snake. The reptilian vemeronasal sensory organ, which is called the Jacobson's organ, that snakes rely so heavily on to survive. They're paired organs, smell receptors, located at the base of the nasal septum and the roof of the mouth in amphibians and reptilians, used to detect pheromones, or chemical messages that carry information between individuals of the same species. So humans also detect these pheromones, and we also have vemeronasal sensory organs, and we also use our tongues to explore during sexual acts. If you look inside the mouth of a snake, you will actually see the obvious identifiable resemblance to the female genitalia. Not to mention the obvious overall phallic symbolism of the snake. So again, the serpent represents the male as well as the female. Serpent is essentially a living reflection of the human sexuality. So the inside of its mouth is female and the outside of its body overall is male, phallic, just like the throat. The reason why the snake has been eternally linked with symbology of creation, in other words, procreation, The Ouroboros is the snake eating its own tail. The snake is inserting its phallic tail into its feminine mouth. Self-impregnation. All things created from one. The upper palate of the mouth is ribbed, just as the vaginal passage is, as well as the throat, because the mouth and the throat are a direct correspondence of the sexual organs. That's why it's called oral sex. Also the reason why we tongue kiss during genital sex. We engage both sets of sexual organs within ourselves. So it's the completion of the sexual circuit. The kiss, the tongue kiss, is the completion of the circuit that is created with the positive inserting into the negative of the sexual regions of the genitalia. So this is one of the reasons that prostitutes don't kiss, because it's a sacred sexual circuit that invokes the complete energetic immersion of the two partners as it starts to invoke life energy. So in other words, it's the cycle of creation. It is the Ouroboros, which happens when we make love while kissing deeply and adding to the menu of ecstasy the main ingredient, which is the brain, which is the mental creation, which is the etheric creation. So this exact correspondence is exactly why the mouth, the vagina, and the inner penis all comprised of mucous membranes. In other words, the salty secretion. And this is why all of these glands and organs are affected by the same infective diseases such as thrush, herpes, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, HPV and HIV, etc. That's why all of these things are transmitted through mucous membranes. The overall external image of all the throat organs collectively contained in the muscles has a phallic resemblance. So this again is the direct union of the reproductive organs between the masculine and the feminine, reflected identically in the throat, as above, so below the belt. From inside you see the female, and from outside you see the male, just like the snake. And again, inside the vocal cords in the throat, we see again the Masonic symbolism of the square and the compass, of the diamond, the as above, so below, as well as the twin pillars which flank the throat or the thyroid gland, such as the carotid artery and the internal jugular vein, which represent the twin pillars of Jachin and Boaz. So this is why it's so dangerous to smoke, because when you're smoking, you're drying out the mucous membranes. You are literally burning the cells within the throat, and it dries out the mucous membranes, and it creates inflammation, and it toxifies these organs. It toxifies the filtration organ of the tonsils, and it specifically toxifies the thyroid gland, which is right beneath the vocal cords. This leads to the mutation of the sounds and the energy that is omitted from these organs, from the vocal cords. This destroys your ability to be able to speak properly, to be able to emit the proper sounds from the vocal cords. And this is the element of adding fire to water. The water is the feminine, the internal throat. Such as smoking cigarettes is the masculine fire, ironically phallic. So this onslaught of the fire in the water will destroy the sacred water balance. The throat creates vibrations, sound, and secretions. The vocal cords are the key to creation, just as the vagina is the key to creation. These are both the gateways of birth and creation. And the brain is also a direct correspondence between the throat and the vagina. So the throat is a direct correspondence between the brain and the vagina. So it goes from the brain to the throat to the sacral regions. All of these things are a direct correspondence with each other because they're all essential in the process of creation. You create mentally, and you create vocally and verbally, and you create physically with your genitalia. This is the genesis. This is the birth of the Holy Trinity. The vibration, the thought becomes the vibration, becomes the sound. And the light then becomes matter. God is in the vibration.
When air passes through our vocal cords as we speak or sing, they create a series of sound waves, which we can hear. This series of sound waves we call vibration. The vocal cords create the initial vibrations. This series of sound waves we call vibration. The vocal cords create the initial vibrations, which is the initial tones we hear that begin the sound we make when speaking and singing.
Some scientists have proposed that the answer to the Big Bang riddle lies in the movements of these giant brains.
It's so simple. Here's a brain on which we live, and here's another brain floating in the higher dimension. There's absolutely nothing difficult about imagining that these collide with each other.
According to this idea, sometime before the Big Bang, two brains carrying parallel universes began drifting toward each other. Until
all of that energy has to go somewhere. Where does it go? It goes into the Big Bang. It creates the expansion that we see, and it heats up all the particles in the universe in this big fiery mass.
As if this weren't weird enough, the proponents of this idea make another radical claim. The Big Bang was not a special event. They say that parallel universes could have collided not just once in the past, but again and again.
And again.
The fact is, we don't really know what happens when two brains collide. You can wind up with the same situation we had with the Big Bang. The equations don't make sense.
They have to make a lot of assumptions in their models, and I don't think they've really solved the problem of the Big Bang and string theory.
Now watch and listen as these vocal cords create the vibrations that become our voices.
What is the shape of sound? This is going to surprise you, that those of you who don't know what the shape of sound is, most of you probably think that sound is a wave. And it leaves somebody's mouth, say, or it leaves a loudspeaker, and it goes wiggly, wiggly, wiggly through the air. Well, I have to disappoint you if you think that is the case. Sound does not do that. Sound is actually spherical. So every sound that you've ever heard from the moment of your birth has been spherical. Now here's a nice diagram to demonstrate this, but before we get to the diagram, let me just talk you through the thing. We have vocal folds, little flap of skin that vibrates up and down. What happens in the throat when that little flap of skin vibrates up and down because of the passage of air coming up from our lungs is that a little pearl of sound is created. Here it is, that little pearl. It's a tiny little pearl, spherical pearl of sound. Rapidly expands up our throats, through our mouths. Some of it goes up through our nasal cavities. Two bubbles are formed, one in front of our lips, and one comes down the nasal cavity and joins the main passage of sound out through the mouth. And in a split second, we have this beautiful bubble of sonic energy standing in front of our lips. Of course, it doesn't stand, it actually is moving very fast, but if you can just visualize it statically for a moment. So here it is. Here's the little bubble coming out of the mouth. And on the surface of that bubble is a beautiful pattern. And that is the pattern that represents all the structure in your beautiful voice. And of course, as I said, it doesn't sit there. it rapidly expands away at round about 700 miles an hour. So it's quite hard to kind of visualize, but you can see here a very large sphere that's been drawn just to give you the impression that it's moving away from the head. And there's a guy standing, blowing bubbles, and you can see straight away, I think you can see on that there's a lot of structure in the bubble, and also you can see that although the main strength of the bubble is in front of this guy, can you see here that behind there's another bubble forming behind him. And what actually is happening is, I'll go into this a little bit more detail later, but the sound is refracting backwards. You know, if you're walking behind someone, you can still hear them talking, can't you? Not as loudly, of course, but you can still hear them. Doesn't matter where you are in relation to that person, you will still hear them. And the reason for that is something in science called diffraction, and it's simply the case that the molecules that are being jostled have reactions. They actually bounce backwards as well. A bit like a billiard table or a pool table. You strike the balls and they scatter, but you get reactions in different directions. So some of the energy goes behind the guy. But what is absolutely true is that about a millisecond after the bubble leaves the mouth, if you were to look straight down, say on my head now, and if you could see this sound bubble, it would be totally spherical about my person. Equally behind, equally in front. However, if the energy in the bubble had color, let's say we attribute the color blue to it, then what you would see on the surface of the bubble in front of me would be quite a deep blue, but behind me it would be rather faint blue. So that's just to give you the illustration that there's more intensity in the direction of propagation than there is behind. So is that all fairly clear? I hope so. Anyway, moving on. We've done this little graphic to show that sound is, as I said, not a wave, but in fact a bubble. And all this is taking a slice through the sonic bubble here, and you'll see these rings. Well, what they are representing are the areas of high compression and low compression within the sonic bubble. So right in the center is meant to be the event, as it were. Whatever the event is, it could be my voice, it could be a hand clap, it could be anything, but that's the event right in the center. And then it expands outward in this spherical way, creating areas of high pressure and low pressure. So these are areas where the molecules are all kind of bunched up together, and areas where they're slack, they're not bunched up, they're less compressed, let's say. You don't need to look at the top half, that's just a slice that we've taken off, but the top half would in fact look exactly the same as the bottom half. Now what's this wiggle in the middle? Well, the wiggle in the middle is basically the sine wave. This is what physicists and scientists talk about when they're talking about sinusoidal energy, or they're talking about the sound wave, or they might even be talking about an electromagnetic wave. They still use the same terminology, it's a wave. Well, it isn't a wave. What it is, this is a graph. It's a graph of the energy, of the law of the energy. Let me just explain a little bit more what I mean by that. So if this is the sound bubble at the bottom here, can you see, you might be able to see these little dotted lines going up. Say that one there, for example, if I can hold my hand steady enough, that one there is coming right from the outside of the sphere where it's kind of really dark, meaning that the energy is really compressed in the bubble at that point. So look where it goes on the graph. That goes up to this point here, which is the top of the graph, if you like. This is the high energy. So in graphic terms, that's the top. But look here, this bit here where it's like clear, there's not much compression of sound. In other words, if you go up there, you get to the 0 point, meaning that there's hardly any compression at that point. So if you follow that law, as it were, it's a mathematical law. The way that sound propagates is to what is called a sinusoidal law. Now, you don't need to if you're not mathematicians, or you were never very good at math, you don't need to worry about it. The main thing to remember about this sinusoidal law is that energy can never go from point A to point B instantaneously. It's impossible. To do that, you'd have to exceed the speed of light, and you can't do that. Well, I don't believe you can. The point is that anything, take a pendulum swinging backwards and forwards, it can't go from this extreme to this extreme instantaneously. It takes time, and as it goes backwards and forwards, so it builds up its velocity, comes to a halt, reverses direction, and goes back the other way. This is a periodic motion, backwards and forwards, and that's what sound does. So as this sound sphere is expanding, it is not only expanding, but the outside of it is kind of trembling. It has a tremor. And it's the tremor which is the sound. Yes? And that is what that graph is all about. It's actually showing us that the law of the energy looks like a wave. And this is where the big confusion has come in science. Scientists everywhere talk about sound waves. They also talk about electromagnetic waves. So I need to put you straight on that as well. There's no such thing as an electromagnetic wave. All electromagnetism is spherical. Exactly the same as sound. It's spherical, different kind of energy, but it's still spherical. It might be hard to swallow, but as I said, open your hearts, and maybe it'll go in.
So this is why the language is so important. And this refers to the languages that were dispersed in Babylon. And Babylon, or Akkadian Bavalim, is the gateway of God. In other words, the vaginal, the throat, the vibrational gateway of God. So what we're looking at here is a diagrammatic comparison of the human brain as well as the male pelvis. We are seeing the similarity of what we have obviously here is the phallic septum pellucidum, which penetrates directly between the bilateral hemispheres of the brain. So in other words, you have the phallic penetrating the feminine. Again, as I am and I have pointed out throughout the presentation, is the human brain geometry related to the Vesica Piscis, which actually the human brain follows the same geometry up. So again, here we're clearly seeing the phallic penetrating the feminine. So we have the duality creating the geometry of the human form. So we have the septum pellucidum here penetrating down. And this is an exact, well, not an exact, but it's a very similar geometric structure as the human pelvis. As we're seeing here, we have the cross-section of the prostate and the fascia of the prostate and the sheath of the prostate, which penetrates down into the bulb of the penis, just as the septum pellucidum and the third ventricle penetrates down into the fourth ventricle. Directly penetrates the bilateral symmetry. And you can see sort of the butterfly wing-shaped pattern of the lateral ventricles, as I've covered in the previous 2.5-hour presentation of the monarch butterfly within the human brain. And so again, we're seeing the butterfly symmetry of the pelvis, which I just showed with the human pelvis and the sphenoid bone. And this is another cross-section of the pelvis directly relating to the human brain as well, with the same geometry. Now, I know this isn't exact, but if you pay close attention, you can see the similar geometries here. You can see the wings cross from both sides here. You can see the prostate area cross-section here penetrating down, just as the lateral ventricles penetrate down to the third ventricle, down to the fourth ventricle. So again, you can see with the bulb here, the bulb of the penis and the bulbous fourth ventricle down towards the brain stem, towards the cerebellum down here. So again, you can see the clear similarities. Although it's not identical, you can see the same, you can see the resemblant structure. Now, I almost forgot to mention here that the prostate is also what produces crucial and critical seminal fluid, which provides the main component of semen, or the fluid of reproduction. And just as the ventricles within the brain are also the main component which produces the cerebrospinal fluid, the main fluid, the main component, which I'm going to cover here further in depth here in just a moment in the video.
about the crucial aspect of the seminal fluid and the cerebrospinal fluid as well. And since we're on the areas of the septum pellucidum and the lateral ventricles, this is obviously the same geometry as the Greek letter psi. Again, here you have the wings or the chalice. You have the chalice, the Holy Grail. You have the Holy of Holies here within the lateral ventricles, and the third ventricle, which penetrates the two. So again, you have the chalice and the masculine penetrating that chalice, the blade in the chalice. You have the masculine penetrating the feminine, the penis penetrating the womb, the symbol of the psi, the Holy Trinity. And again, this is the Greek letter psi, which relates to the psi, which means the mind, the psyche. So you have psi and psi. The similarities of the language are not just similar by coincidence or by accident. There's a specific reason, because psi, S-P-S-Y, comes from the Greek psi, meaning parapsychology, a form of mental energy, a form of psychic energy. And as I was explaining far earlier towards the beginning of the presentation about the psi, or being used as the trident, as the weapon of the trident, in reflection of the destruction, the destructive principle of Neptune and Poseidon, as well as Shiva, the creator, preserver, and destroyer, in reflection is of the mind, referring to the destructive power of the mind, which must be overcome and must be balanced through meditation and healthy practices. It must be balanced out. And that is why the aspect of Shiva is again depicted with the serpent wrapped around his neck in a benevolent form, signifying that he has overcome, he has come to a perfected state of ascension and overcome the destructive nature of the serpent within himself. He has risen the Kundalini, he has risen the Uraeus. And again, as I've covered in the previous presentation, when you see one holding the serpent, it signifies that they've tamed the serpent. This is very unique and very interesting. The Vedic Devata called Ganesh represents the ventral view of the human brain. This is from Professor Tony Nader, medical doctor, PhD in human physiology. Expression of Veda and the Vedic literature, page 333. Funny numerology there. The Vedic Devata are the various aspects of natural law that organize the entire universe and maintain it in perfect order. They are the laws of nature, or collections of laws of nature, with specific administrative functions that provide for the creation, maintenance, and dissolution of the universe. The Devata are integral aspects of our own human physiology, as well as our human psychology. They are embodied in every human being with the same forms and functions described in the Vedic literature. The Devata are present in the physiology of everyone, no matter what one's race, belief system, or religion, no matter which political party one's associate with, or in which geographical area one is born. The ventral view of the human brain, which is the brain seen from underneath, shows the clear correspondence between the Vedic Devata Ganesh and the pons, the medulla and the cerebellum. The face of Ganesha corresponds to the pons. The medulla corresponds to the trunk of Ganesha. The trunk of Ganesh. The roots of the trigeminal nerves represent the eyes of Ganesh. A group of nerves at the pons represent the tusks of Ganesh, as we can see here in figure 8. The cerebellum constitutes the ears of Ganesh. These structures not only look just exactly correspondent to Ganesh, but their functions in human physiology correspond to the functions and activities ascribed to Ganesh. Ganesh's place is at the door of the brain, called the medulla. The enlarged image shows 2 big ears, a trunk, and tusks. So Ganesh sits at the door of the mind. He is the gatekeeper, and he decides who should go in or not. If a negative influence tries to enter the brain, he stops it right there. Therefore, he is called the Vinayaka, remover of obstacles. These obstacles are of the mind. And notice specifically that one of the key aspects of Ganesh is the symbol of the psi located on the forehead or the third eye. Again, the psi of the psychology. And I know it would be easy for one to assume, for one to be skeptical about this and assume that this drawing of the human brain is just emphasizing a likeness to Ganesh. But this would not hold water, because you can look up any view of the human, any ventral view of the human brain, and you can see that this is exactly correspondent, which is likened to Ganesh. So yet again, once again, we also have the phallic representation located within the human brain. Again, this is obviously the image of the elephant, but it's obviously a phallic representation, visibly phallic in nature. And I want to make sure that you understand this here in reference to Ganesha and the human brain. So you have to notice the exact representations of the symbolism, which is that the Ganesha has the distinct division down the very center of his trunk, just as the human pons and the human spinal cord directly represents the division of the brainstem of the pons into two segments, which are known as the pyramids of the brain, the direct division down the trunk, which are the pyramids. And the central tusks, which would represent the tusks of Ganesha, are the accessory nerves, and also the vagus nerves, where the Christ is crucified at the 33rd degree, at the 33rd vertebrae, the base of the human spine, of the basal ganglia, where the cerebrospinal fluid crosses and is crucified by the vagus nerve on either side. It is crucified between the vagus nerves. And so also depicted very distinctly in the artwork of Ganesha is the depiction of the third eye, or the pineal gland, which is located directly here, which would be the third eye of Ganesha, of the elephant, which the pineal gland would be located in the human brain right here, but on the top of the diencephalon. So this is the bottom view of the the bottom view of the pons, and the bottom view of the brain, where the pineal gland is located right here at the top of the diencephalon. And then depicted on the crown of Ganesha is direct correspondence. Notice the little dot is the exact location of the pituitary gland. So again, located right on the psi of Ganesha's forehead, the psi, the psychology, the psyche, is the exact location of where the pineal gland is located in the brain, at the top of the diencephalon. And then you have the little gem on the crown of Ganesh is the exact representation of the location of the pituitary gland. This is the pituitary gland, located right at the base of the optic chiasma. And again, the tusks, this is right where the vagus nerves attach to the base of the brainstem, attached to the basal ganglia. This image here is the correspondence of the Egyptian Atef crown, which was typically worn by Osiris, which likely represents the lotus blossom, the conical shape of the head, the conical shape of the lotus blossom, which the Atef crown worn by Osiris typically depicted the Oreos serpent located directly on the third eye, and was flanked by two of the feathers, ostrich feathers, which were said to have represented possibly the Bennu bird. And again, the key aspects of the Atef crown, as related here, was the Oreos sun disk located on the third eye, or representing the pineal gland, the enlightenment of the third eye, a direct representation of the glands located within the human brain, and the correspondence between the Atef crown and the human brain, and particularly the essential organs of the human brain, which is the correspondence of the two glands. You have the pineal gland, as depicted as the very center of the ventral view of the human brain. You have the two ostrich feathers, the two flanking ostrich feathers, Atef crown, you have the location of the pineal gland and the location of the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is located right here, directly beneath the optic chiasma of the brain, and the pineal gland, located at the direct center at the top of the diencephalon. Again, depicted with the Osirian Atef crown. And again, you have the two serpents of the Kundalini, the Pingala, the Ida and the Pingala, the two serpents which run the circuit of the human nervous system all the way down the spine and up, finally climaxing at the human brain in the left and right ventricles of the human brain, and the circuit, the arcing between the two glands of the two electrical glands of the brain, the pineal and the pituitary, the masculine and the feminine, or vice versa, since the pituitary is actually represents the pair of balls, and the pineal is located directly in the vesica piscis, as I've just shown here. This is the accurate depiction of the Ordeos serpent of the human brain. You have the spinal column, you have the central nervous ganglia coming up the basal ganglia up into the pons, which again, you have to view the whole thing as a single view this as the cobra. The cobra rising up the human spine, and again, Ordeos literally means to climb up, or to rise, to climb, as in to climb a hill, to ascend the mountain, to ascend the hill, as I've covered here in the presentation. So the Ordeos rises up the spine, it penetrates through the king's-queen's chamber, and it penetrates out through the third eye, from the pineal through the pituitary, penetrates out through the forehead. So view this whole thing as the single serpent rising up, and it has ascended and it has risen out. That is the actual depiction of the Ordeos serpent. That is the actual legitimate representation of the Ordeos serpent. Right there. Imagine the serpent, imagine the cobra, the king cobra rising out. That is the symbol of the enlightenment. The enlightenment has risen up and risen out. And this is significant because, as I've shown throughout this presentation here, what will tie this all together is this image here, and this is significant to the Atef crown, as I will show here in a second, is because, as I've mentioned, Osiris, who climbs the ladder to heaven to commune with Nut, or the sky, is this image is depicting here is a 7-stepped pyramid, or a 7-stepped ladder to heaven, of which Osiris was known as the god of the staircase. And so the symbolism here is very obvious to what I'm showing throughout this presentation, is the reason why this is the exact reason why it shows the serpent ascending the staircase, and it shows the serpent as at the divide point in the exact same image as I'm showing here as the Hebrew letter Hebrew resh, which means head, right there. And the basal ganglia of the brain corresponding to the Ordeos serpent, which is why the Ordeos serpent is at the divide between the lower base of the pyramid, or in other words, the Jed pillar, the spine, the cosmic pillar, the world cosmic axis, and this is why the serpent divides between the spine, and Osiris sits upon the throne. He sits upon the mercy seat with the Atef crown above, which is the thalamus, the omphalos, the cosmic axis, the world pillar, which penetrates into the skull which penetrates into the skull. The throne of heaven within your skull, within the center of your brain, the thalamic region of the thalamus of the brain, wearing the Atef crown, which is the thalamic region of the brain. And I also want to cover here, since we're on the area of the cross-section of the human pelvis and the male prostate, there's another direct similarity another direct correspondence between, we have the prostate, which is located at the sacral chakra region. The sacral chakra is the color orange. The color orange is the color of the sun. The Egyptian Hathor sun disk represents the sun. And now the horns are a fertility symbol. The horns, the bull horns, the goat horns, the horned animal, the horned beast always represents fertility and nature and strength and power. It is a power animal. It is a power symbol. It's representing the fertility and the springtime, the power of the sun, and its regenerative principle of the life force to make things, to create. It is the power of creation. So that is why the Egyptians and every religion, the Hindus, the Babylonians, the Mesopotamian religions, the Native American, all relate to the bull. They all wear the horns. Shiva has the crescent moon adorned upon his forehead, and this represents, again, the crescent bull horns of the moon as reflected in his aspect of Pashupati, as Lord of the Cattle, again depicted with the bull horns, the crown of horns, the crown of Thor, the crown of thorns, the crown of horns, which I've covered in the Symbols of Power Part 1, the Monarch Symbolism video. So again, I've covered all this before, so I'm not going to go back into that again, but again, the crown of thorns, the crown of horns. And in the previous Symbols of Power Part 2, I've covered the Uraeus serpent as well throughout that presentation. So I'm not going to rehash that in this one as well. You can go back and you need to go back and watch that one to get the full context here. But again, so that is the significance of, again, we're seeing the significance of the male aspect, and again, the as above, so below the belt. As in astrophysiology, the astrotheology of the solar essence reflected within the body. And the Egyptian goddess Hathor is depicted as the bull. She has the wide face of a bull. She is the bull goddess, as most Egyptian pantheons and as well as most ancient religion pantheons are all bull gods and goddesses. Solar calves, lunar cows, they are all bull deities. And you have to go deep into that to actually verify what I'm talking about. But they are all bull deities. That's why they wear the crowns of horns, the horned fertility of the sun and the springtime. So this is exactly why the Egyptian goddess Hathor, again, who is a bull goddess, has the face of the bull and the ears of a bull, and that's why she has the wide face. She has such a wide face because she's the bull. She's the cow goddess, the lunar solar cow goddess, and she is an exact representation of the female uterus. She is a female cow fertility goddess, which is again why she is an exact representation. She is representing the female uterus. This is an image that I compiled. What we're looking at is the muscles of the perineum, or in other words, we're looking at the pelvic muscles of the genitalia. We're looking at the genitalia muscles. And this is the female, this is the male, which obviously have an almost exact corresponding muscle structure. Okay, I got a kick out of this. You're gonna love this. So, I was just covering out the urogenital triangle combined with the anal triangle and the muscles, perineum, the perineal muscles, are exactly the figure 8 shape. They are the lemniscate, the lemniscus, which the lemniscus is a bundle of nerve endings, which is why it's in the shape of the lemniscate. And the lemniscate, again, is the figure 8 form. And so I got a kick out of this because the lemniscate, the figure 8, is also what's known as the analemma. So I mentioned earlier what we're looking at are called medically called the perineal muscles, but you can easily alternately pronounce that the perineal muscles. And this is no coincidence, and this is no mistake. And as I'm showing you here, there is a direct link between the muscle's shape as the lemniscus, or in other words, the analemma, and the analemma again covers the cycle of the perennial year.
It's the path of the sun throughout the year. The perineal muscles, the perennial muscles. So this is no coincidence. This is astrophysiology at its finest. So it's the analemma is the path that the sun takes throughout the year. So I had always been wondering previously why it's called an analemma. Up again after seeing that the anal triangle, the muscles of the perineus, and the sphincter muscles are literally the analemma shape, that gave it a whole new meaning. And from Latin analemma, the pedestal of a sundial. From Greek analemma, prop, support. But it gets interesting when we get to the roots of the word. In other words, from ana, meaning upward. In other words, to lift up. And lambani, to take. So analemma literally means to take up. And as I just showed you, the symbol of the Ouroboros, the Leviathan, the lemniscate, the serpent eating its own tail. And this makes me think, it's funny, analemma, the Ouroboros, the snake, the serpent, takes us to astrolabe. And the astrolabe is from medieval Latin astrolabium. And I find this interesting because, again, as we've already covered, labium means lips. Astrolabe is linked to the analemma, and it's related to taking up, it's a star-taking instrument. Lemma is something received or taken. So what about the anal triangle and the sphincter muscle relates to something received or taken? In other words, to take up. The anal lemma, and I know this is very crude, but it's also very interesting and very crude and very humorous, but very interesting nonetheless. So I think that this definitely went off track, but I had to put this in there because it's interesting. Oh yeah, and so when we look up anal, just to confirm this. From Latin analis, of the anus is the inferior opening of the alimentary canal. From Old French, anus. From Latin anus, meaning a ring, anus. From ano, ring, as in analemma. So called for its shape, compare Greek dactylios, anus, literally ring for the finger. Dactylos, finger. The dactyl means finger, hand. So the anus is literally the ring for your finger. So I think that,
it's obvious to see the correspondence between the muscle structure of the perineum and how it directly relates to the human form. In other words, I guess you could say this is the larger fractal of what is within. As within, so without. We've got the human structure right here within the human genitalia. And this is why the human sexuality and the sexual organs are so sacred. And we can see the similarities of this here is the gluteus maximus muscle. So in other words, it's the butt muscle. And it's in the exact corresponding spot as you sit in meditation or yoga, you sit on your gluteus maximus. And we can see the similarities here, the similar shape between the hands, which when we look deeper into the symbolism of the hands, that is actually the vesica piscis, as I just mentioned, which corresponds to the female anatomy, which corresponds to the female sexuality. Which, if we go in even deeper into the anatomy, corresponds to the Virgin Mary. And in the anatomy, we have the hood, which forms the labia minora. Again, this is what's called the prepuce, the clitoral prepuce, and the hood of the Virgin Mary. And again, the praying hands referring to the goddess, the female anatomy, the female goddess aspect. And again, as I mentioned, with the hands, the position of the hands. And what I'm pointing at here is actually the sphincter muscles, which again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, the sphincter, which relates to sphinx, comes from etymological roots of sphinx, meaning to asphyxiate, meaning to strangle. It's the strangler. because the muscles constrict or they strangle. So again, these muscles contract because that's a feminine energy, is contraction. In physics, the contraction is the centripetal convergence, where things contract, they go inward. So this is a constricting, contracting energy. And again, we're looking at the similarity of the hands, the hand position regarding the female anatomy. And this is why people like Angela Merkel always show you the hands, the sacred vagina, the sacred goddess, the feminine aspect. What she's showing you is the matriarchy. She is showing you the power of the goddess, which it is the matriarchy that holds power behind the patriarchy. The hidden hand is always the goddess behind the patriarchy. It always will be that way. As I've mentioned in my previous videos, everyone knows that the matriarch is always behind the patriarch. Always will be. She controls reproduction. She controls genetic lineage. She controls how the bloodlines will be passed down. Everyone knows that when the female is not happy, the male will not be happy. The goddess has the ultimate say. So again, as I've covered throughout this video, is I've included the symbolism of the Masonic arch, or the Royal Arch, as well as the obvious Freemasonic compass, the square and the compass, which is the main, most prominent logo or symbol for Freemasonry. And this is the deepest truth, and you won't find this from anyone. You won't find this anywhere else. You're not going to get this truth from these so-called pseudo-fake Christian YouTubers such as Mario the Vigilant Christian, KJ Osborne of Scariest Movie Ever, not Truth Red Pill Revolution, Truth Media Revolution. None of these people are going to tell you. They don't have no idea as to what any of these symbols actually mean, as to what the all-seeing, this is the all-seeing eye of Lucifer. Absolutely clueless. What we're looking at is known as the urogenital triangle, or in other words, the as above, so below reflection that is shown in so much esoteric artwork that it's ridiculous. And this is what no one else is going to tell you, is that, as you can see here, we have in the Masonic compass, which draws feminine curves or arcs, you have the arch, or the keystone of the arch, which represents the clitoris, as well as you have the legs of the entire body of the clitoris, making up what's known as the urogenital triangle. And then we have the square down below, which draws phallic straight lines. In other words, it draws angles. And the V is the ruler, and that corresponds to what is known as the anal triangle, which consists of the perineal muscles which attach to the pubic archway, the pubic arch. And in the center we have the gateway, or in other words, the vaginal gateway, from which all life emerges from the darkness of the womb, the cosmic womb, from which we emerge from a separate realm into this realm. All life is born out of the darkness, comes through the gateway. And the men of Freemasonry wear a feminine apron with the Masonic logo of the vagina right over covering their vagina, because they don't want to get the cement onto their vagina. So when you actually want to know what the real all-seeing eye in the pyramid of the Illuminati, the symbol, is all about,
All you need to do is look to the human body, which is what it's all about. And this is what none of the Christian YouTubers or the Christian, so-called fake Christian truthers are going to tell you, because they have no clue. They have no idea what they're talking about. So here is your all-seeing eye of Lucifer, your truncated pyramid, with the all-seeing eye in the middle. This is what it's all about. Because you get to the innermost muscles of the perineum, and you have the deep transverse perennius. And again, this is the pubic archway. Stedman's medical dictionary describes the innermost layer of the brain as tender mother. The innermost layer, the pia mater, which is Latin, again, tender mother, is a thin, delicate membrane that inspired some early neuroanatomists with a poetical bent to compare the way this membrane envelops the brain to the gentleness of a mother caressing her infant. Note again, the medical dictionary refers to this inner part of the brain as a mother caressing her infant. Does this begin to make sense to you as to who the Virgin Mother is? The outermost layer of the brain matter is called the dura mater, meaning tough mother, and the inner layer, the pia mater, the tender mother, between the two lies a reticulated layer of tissue called the arachnoid, whose appearance reminded one of a spider's web. Arachnoid, the web, the curtain, the veil. It's in the brain, separating the outer from the inner, just as the temple veil separates the inner from the outer. Arachnoid literally in Latin means old spider mother. The Native Americans have legends of Spider Grandmother, who is the creator of heaven, who wove the web of the stars. Just as in our neuroanatomy we have the web woven of neural connections, just as in the universe we have the web of neural connections within the mind of the universe. So again, we've covered the meanings of sacred, sacral, as well as the sacral energies, the sacred sacral energies, which revolve around sex, impulse, urges, survival, and the sacral regions, in other words, the sacred sexual regions, the reproductive glands are also where we find the sacred secretions, the secretions of the sacred hormones. Hormone comes from hormone, meaning urge, impulse, instinct. In other words, our first most basic urges. The words secrete and secret are etymologically linked. The secret, the secretions, the sacred secretions, the sacred secret. So again, this links directly the connections between the sacral region, the sexual regions, and the pineal gland, as well as the pituitary gland in the brain, which also produce the sacred secret, the secretions of the hormones, of the hormone, the urge, the impulse. So again, this directly links the as above, so below the belt. As within the brain, so below the belt. And again, the fornix and the pia mater, or in other words, the vault of heaven and the tender mother and her vault within the brain, the vesica piscis. So the chrism, the Christ, sits within the vesica piscis, the tender mother, in the arms of the pia mater, of the tender mother. And within the brain, the word Christ comes from Latin and Greek chrism, Christos, or oil. And these are all of these are the holy anointing oils. They are the sacred secretion. And the pia mater, the tender mother, actually produces 70% of the body, of the cerebrospinal fluid. In other words, the pia mater, the tender mother, literally produces the Christ. The pia mater literally produces the chrism, the cerebrospinal fluid, the sacred oil, the anointing oil. Like a thermometer, the cerebrospinal fluid circulates via pressure variations from proper breathing technique and blood pressure. It must be kept clean or pure, or it will stagnate and cause disease. The cerebrospinal fluid, the Christ, gets crucified at the blood-brain barrier and the vagus nerve, the 33rd vertebrae. The Christ, the CSF, is produced and born in the fornix. It travels down, or in other words, the cave. It travels down, or the manger. It travels down the spine and rises up again like the phoenix after being crucified at the blood-brain barrier at the 33rd degree. Christ is crucified at the 33rd, age 33, the 33rd vertebrae, called Golgotha, the place of the skull. It is sanctified, consecrated at the inner sanctum, the womb, and the tomb. A sanctum means the innermost chamber. In other words, the third ventricle, the Holy of Holies. He comes from the womb and ends up in the tomb. The birth and the death, the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. Active production of spinal fluid, CSF, requires energy to cause the cell linings to the ventricles to secrete salt into the ventricles. The root word sal is where we get salvation, salivation, the salt of the earth. Salt saves, it's a preservative. Christ is the anointed one. And you anoint something by anointing it with the sacred fluid, the milk, the cream. This brings us back to Proto-Indo-European root gu, to pour a libation as the root word for God. This is why you have to get down on your knees to receive the sacred cream, to receive the fluid onto your head, to get anointed with the sacred fluid, with the cream, the milk, the oil, to the land of milk and honey. What's the only substance that is sticky like honey, the consistency of honey, and is the color of milk? What is the only substance? It's the sacred secretion. It is the semen, from where we get the words like seminary, seminal. Seminary literally means a breeding ground, from seminarius, meaning of seed, literally from semen. The genitive is semenis, seed. The semen, the seed. The cum, meaning with or together. Meaning school for training priests. Commonly used for any school, but especially academies for young ladies. Literally a breeding ground. And this is why in the Catholic churches, this is why we find the pedophilia. This is why they're always associated with the children and the sex scandals, the pedophilia, the sex trafficking. Most religious terminology and symbology is rooted and stems from the seed, or the seminal, literally from the seed of ancient fertility rites, rites of passage, and sex. Because the sacral regions are where the most nerve endings in the body are located. And this is why when you have an orgasm, you have a godly experience. You have a communion with God. A cum-union, with Latin root word cum, does indeed connect etymologically to sex. Latin cum meaning with or together. And the only way that you come is you come with, or you come together as one. You become one with God. You come together with your sexual partner. Sure, you can do it individually, but it comes from together. It comes from two, being together or multiple. So it does link etymologically with the word come. And so when you graduate with honors, or cum laude, you are indeed graduating or being anointed with the benefits. You are receiving the benefits. You're receiving the blessing. You're reaping the fruits of your labor. Just as the child is the fruit of the woman's labor. You're being anointed with the benefits.
The knowledge of all the universe is evil. You keep them away from it through fear. You tell them to fear it at all costs. Therefore, they will never awaken. They will never have knowledge. That is how you control humanity.
And as always, thank you guys for taking the time to watch the video. If you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe to the button down below, hit the bell notification button next to that, and click get notifications for the channel. That way you're not missing any of the future updates. So that way you continue to get notifications from my future videos and my future presentations as well. If you haven't yet, you can receive updates from all of my full research articles and all of my full video presentations on my patreon.com/liftingtheveil. That way you're not missing out on any of my full research presentations, and you can cite all of my sources, and you can also choose to support my work from there as well if you appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Y'all have a good one. Keep lifting the veil.